In the silent halls of Olympus, a golden crown trembles on the marble floor. A queen watches her reflection ripple across the clouds, not from vanity, but from the weight of eternity itself. Hera, daughter of Titans, sister and wife of Zeus, goddess of marriage and vengeance alike, was never merely divine. She was consequence made flesh. Her story begins not in love, but in rebellion, forged in the downfall of her father and sealed beneath the thunder of her husband's rule. Yet hidden beneath centuries of worship and fear lies something far quieter, the portrait of a woman who desired order in a world ruled by chaos. A queen who could command storms yet yearned for loyalty. Tonight, we descend into her myth, not to judge her, but to understand her. What truly lies behind the mask of Olympus' most feared goddess? Before Olympus gleamed in gold and glory, there was silence, the kind that hums beneath the skin of the cosmos. The world was a trembling infant, wrapped in shadow and sea foam. And within that darkness stirred the Titans, ancient, vast, and merciless. Among them was Kronos, who devoured his own children to cheat prophecy. One by one, the newborn gods were swallowed whole, their cries muffled by eternity. Yet even inside the stomach of a tyrant, something divine refused to die. In that prison of flesh and time, Hera was born. Not in sunlight, but in suffocation. Her first heartbeat echoed beside her siblings, Poseidon, Hades, Demeter, Hestia, all swallowed, all waiting. There, in the cavernous belly of their father, she learned silence. And in silence, she learned patience. When Zeus, the youngest, escaped his father's hunger and rose against him, the swallowed children were freed. From the torn depths of Kronos, Hera emerged into a newborn world gasping for order. Lightning split the heavens, mountains rose like wounds from the sea, and the first winds whispered her name, Hera. Her eyes opened to the storm. Where others flinched at Zeus's thunder, she stood unmoved. It was said her gaze could still the sea, her calm could hush quarrels among gods. Yet, within that calm simmered an inheritance, the rage of a daughter born from imprisonment. Rhea, her mother, embraced her with trembling joy. "You are justice," the Titaness whispered. "May you bring balance where chaos reigns." But Hera did not yet understand justice. All she knew was that freedom had a cost, and it was always paid by those who suffered quietly. As she grew, the golden air around her thickened with reverence. Even among immortals, she seemed untouchable, her movements deliberate, her voice carrying the quiet authority of one who has endured torment without breaking. Where Zeus was the storm, Hera was the eye within it, serene, but capable of devastation if disturbed. The gods began to gather. Poseidon shaped the seas, Hades carved the underworld, Demeter coaxed wheat from soil. But Hera lingered at the threshold of Olympus, unsure of what her dominion would be. She did not crave battle or domain, she craved permanence, the assurance that order would not crumble again into chaos. When Zeus finally cast down Kronos and seized the throne of the cosmos, it was Hera who watched him most closely. She saw in him both salvation and danger, the liberator who had ended one tyranny, only to birth another kind. His charm was lightning, brilliant, warm, and deadly. He looked upon her and saw not his sister, but the perfect reflection of his newfound rule, poised, regal, divine. "Join me," he said, "and we shall rule together. Heaven will know balance." But Hera did not answer. She had seen too much of power's hunger to believe such promises easily. Centuries passed like moments among gods. Hera wandered the clouds and the green slopes of Olympus, studying mortals below, fragile, passionate creatures who built altars from gratitude and fear alike. They prayed to the sky for rain, to the soil for growth, and to her for justice. Even before she wore a crown, they sensed in her a force older than love, the yearning for fairness. One night, beneath constellations still raw with creation, she stood at the edge of the heavens, watching the mortal fires flicker far below. A voice came from behind her, deep, smooth, familiar. "Do you pity them?" Zeus asked. "I envy them," she replied. "Their hearts are small enough to fill. He smiled. Then let me fill yours. The words hung between them like lightning about to strike. Hera turned away, the wind rippling through her golden veil. The last one who sought to fill me, she said softly, swallowed me whole. Even Zeus, conqueror of Titans, had no answer. And yet, fate is a patient weaver. Each thread of defiance, each glance of distrust, would knot their destinies tighter until neither could escape the other. For in the order of things, love and control are twins, born of the same spark that forged the first gods. Beneath the rising dawn of Olympus, Hera's eyes reflected a new kind of storm, one not of thunder, but of conviction. The world had been broken once. She would never let it break again. But when a goddess swears to preserve order, what happens when the one who breaks it is her king? The new world was bright, but its light fell upon the ruins of the old. Even after Kronos' fall, the air still trembled with the echo of Titan footsteps, as though time itself feared to move too quickly. Olympus, though crowned in gold, stood upon the bones of rebellion. Hera walked its still-forming halls, where the marble was not yet cool and the thunder still smelt of birth. Every corner whispered of the war that had made them gods. She had seen her brother Zeus strike their father down. She had seen the Titans fall, beings vast as mountains, chained beneath Tartarus. Yet in victory, she found no peace. The sky was free, yes, but the world below was heavy with consequence. Zeus reveled in his triumph. The age of Titans is over, he declared. Now begins the reign of gods. But Hera, standing apart, heard another truth behind his words, the hunger to rule not just heaven, but every heart beneath it. For the first time, the seed of doubt rooted in her chest. She had escaped her father's devouring shadow only to watch another rise, one crowned not by fear, but by charm. Zeus was not Kronos, not yet. But she saw in his laughter the same rhythm of control, the same storm that devoured boundaries. She watched the Olympians claim their thrones. Poseidon shaped the seas with the confidence of a conqueror. Hades descended to the depths, content to rule among the dead. Demeter turned barren earth to green. Hestia tended the sacred flame. Each found purpose. Only Hera lingered in between love and suspicion, between divine order and quiet dread. At times, she wandered the mortal plains, unseen. The rivers carried her reflection, but not her name. She watched the first cities rise, the first temples built to uncertain gods. Mortals offered sacrifices to the sky, not knowing which face of divinity might answer, thunder, sea, or silence. She envied them their ignorance. They did not know the cost of power. One night, on the edge of creation, she found her mother Rhea again, the Titaness wandering the exile lands, wrapped in grey mist. Rhea's once golden eyes now dimmed with time, but when she saw her daughter, she smiled. "You have your father's gaze," Rhea murmured. "It measures everything, weighs it before trust." "Perhaps that is my curse," Hera replied softly. Rhea touched her cheek. "No, my child. That is your gift. The gods are children of excess, they act before they think. But you will make them remember consequence." Her mother's words echoed like prophecy. Hera returned to Olympus with a new stillness, not resignation, but resolve. As Zeus divided dominions among his siblings, he often turned to Hera for counsel. Her mind was calm, her judgments balanced. Even Poseidon deferred to her sense of fairness. Yet Zeus's admiration was double-edged. He loved her clarity but feared her restraint. Where he was lightning, she was law. Where he blazed, she endured. And so, an unspoken tension grew. The conqueror desired the one thing he could not command, her devotion. He courted her in thunder and patience alike. He shaped clouds into swans, turned rain into jewels, sent whispers through the wind. Hera resisted each gesture, for she had learned the danger of promises wrapped in splendor. But destiny, like water, finds every crack. It is said that Zeus, desperate to win her heart, transformed himself into a small, trembling bird, a cuckoo, soaked and shivering in a storm. When Hera saw it on her windowsill, pity overcame pride. She drew it close to warm it. In that instant, the god of thunder revealed himself, radiant, triumphant, disarming. Hera's heart trembled, not from awe, but from recognition. Even in disguise, he had conquered through deception. Still, in that moment of vulnerability, something ancient stirred between them, a bond older than conquest. The world held its breath. Yet beneath that spark, the shadow of Kronos stirred again. The cycle of power and submission was not broken, only rewritten. The Titans had fallen, but their hunger had found new bodies. Zeus and Hera would not yet marry, that story would come later, but already the storm was gathering. She saw in him both salvation and threat, the promise of unity and the danger of dependence. She began to wonder, could two forces of equal power ever coexist without consuming each other? Could love survive beneath the weight of dominion? These were not questions for mortals to ask, and yet, they would come to define divine eternity itself. As the fires of Olympus cooled into civilization, Hera's gaze turned toward the horizon. The Titan's shadow was fading, but its lesson remained etched in her: power was never destroyed, only inherited. And soon, she would learn what it meant to inherit the burden of eternity. But when the past is built on betrayal, can the future ever stand on trust? The war had ended, but victory is never quiet. Even as peace unfurled its golden banners, Olympus pulsed with unease, like a heart that beats too fast after battle. The sky had found its king, the sea its master, the underworld its keeper. Yet, for all their triumph, the gods stood before a throne that was still only half claimed. Zeus, the new ruler of all, walked the radiant steps of his palace, a structure forged from lightning and cloud, each column breathing light. The heavens bent to his will. He could command the wind, summon rain, split mountains in pride. Yet, in the reflection of his power, a void remained. Every king requires balance. Every storm, an eye. The whispers began among the lesser gods: who will stand beside him? Some said Demeter, for her wisdom. Others murmured Themis, goddess of justice. But when Hera entered the hall, calm, poised, and radiant as dawn, the murmurs ceased. She did not enter as a bride, nor as a sister. She entered as inevitability. Zeus's gaze followed her, the way lightning follows a path already drawn in the sky. There was no need for words, even the air bowed between them. She, who had watched his rise and measured his might, would complete the throne. And yet, deep beneath the grandeur, Hera's thoughts churned. The crown he offered was not merely gold, it was a shackle of expectation. To stand beside Zeus meant more than love, it meant being seen and unseen all at once. Still, destiny does not wait for permission. When the coronation came, the heavens themselves took form as audience. The muses sang hymns that rippled through eternity, and the Moirai, the Fates, wove the threads of their union with hands that trembled. The earth blossomed in their honor, rivers shimmered as if drunk on divinity. Zeus raised his hand, his voice a calm storm. Let this be known, no longer are we children of tyranny. From this day, Olympus shall be ruled in balance, by thunder, and by justice. All eyes turned to Hera. She stepped forward, each movement deliberate, as if testing the weight of forever. Her gown shimmered like moonlit cloud, her crown carved from starlight itself. Yet her expression was not triumph. It was serenity, fragile and absolute. I do not rule because I was chosen, she said, her voice soft as rainfall. I rule because I endured. And I will endure still, for as long as the world remembers its vows. The air quivered. Even Zeus, for all his arrogance, felt a flicker of awe. In that moment, the gods witnessed something subtle but immortal, the birth of divine order. If Zeus was chaos harnessed, Hera was its law, the principle that kept the lightning from consuming the sky. They sat upon twin thrones, side by side, the heavens sealing their reign with thunder and song. Yet, Somewhere beneath the marble, the faintest tremor of prophecy stirred. Love between gods is not the same as love among mortals. It burns brighter, but it devours faster. As the celebrations raged across Olympus, wine flowing, stars swirling in dizzying patterns, Hera slipped away from the feast. She walked through the quiet corridors of the new palace, her footsteps echoing like distant rain. From the balcony, she gazed down upon the mortal world. Fires burned in tiny villages, the first humans offering sacrifices of grain and wine, whispering her name with reverence. Hera. Queen. Protector of vows. She should have felt peace. But something inside her whispered that peace, like love, is only a pause between storms. Behind her, the air shimmered. Zeus appeared, smiling that effortless smile that both warmed and unsettled her. You flee from your own celebration, he teased. I do not flee, she replied, without turning. I listen. The earth hums differently now. He joined her at the balcony. It hums with gratitude. With devotion. Or with fear, she murmured. He chuckled, drawing closer. Let them fear. Fear keeps order. It reminds them of our divinity. Hera's eyes narrowed slightly. And who reminds the gods of theirs? The question hung between them like a sword made of silence. For a moment, Zeus's charm faltered. He looked out over the world, the same world he claimed as his, and then back at her, as though seeing the shadow behind her calm for the first time. Do you doubt us, Hera? I doubt nothing, she said softly. That is what frightens me. He reached for her hand. Then doubt me instead. Her fingers trembled, just for an instant, before she withdrew them. You mistake doubt for surrender, she whispered. And I do not surrender. Zeus's laughter rolled like thunder, but his eyes betrayed unease. He loved her strength, even as it challenged him. In her defiance, he found reflection, and in reflection, resistance. That night, as the gods danced and sang their new world into being, Hera lay awake beneath the starlit dome of Olympus. The weight of her crown pressed softly against her brow. She thought of her mother's warning, of the Titan's fall, of the endless cycle of rise and ruin. And in the stillness before dawn, she whispered to herself, I will be more than his queen. I will be his reckoning. Outside, thunder rumbled faintly, not in wrath, but in recognition. The storm knew her name. But what happens when the hand that steadies the crown begins to crave its own throne? The day of their union dawned not like a sunrise, but like creation reborn. Olympus glowed brighter than ever before, every cloud turned gold, every river mirrored the heavens. The air itself seemed alive, trembling with the songs of unseen choirs. It was not merely a wedding. It was the sealing of cosmic law. Zeus, the ruler of the sky, and Hera, the guardian of sacred order, together, they were meant to embody divine balance. But balance is fragile when one side burns brighter than the other. The invitations were written not in ink, but in thunder. From the furthest reaches of the sea to the depths of Hades, gods and spirits gathered. The Ori crowned the gardens with eternal spring. Apollo's lyre sent ripples through the air like threads of gold. The Graces poured nectar that shimmered like sunlight trapped in glass. Even the stars paused their slow drift across the firmament to witness the union of eternity's two halves. And yet, amidst the celebration, a single note of unease hummed beneath every hymn. Hera felt it, faint, insistent, like the sound of wind behind closed doors. She stood before her mirror of polished bronze, the reflection showing not the goddess, but the woman beneath, the one who had once feared being devoured, the one who had survived silence and betrayal. Around her, attendants wove flowers into her hair, each petal heavy with divine fragrance. The scent of ambrosia clung to her skin, soft but suffocating. When Zeus entered, he wore not his armor, but a crown of laurel, the symbol of victory tempered by peace. The heavens are waiting, he said, his voice calm but commanding. And what of the earth? She asked without looking up. Does it wait willingly, or merely because it must? He smiled. It waits because it knows what comes after chaos, order. And you are order, my queen. The words were meant as praise. Yet, to Hera, they sounded like prophecy. When she walked into the grand hall, silence fell. The marble gleamed beneath her feet, carved with scenes of creation, the birth of rivers, the forging of stars, the rebellion of gods. Above her, golden vines curved into arches, each leaf engraved with a vow, harmony, fidelity, eternity. Zeus extended his hand. Lightning flashed gently between them, not as storm, but as pulse. When their fingers touched, the air stilled. The universe itself seemed to exhale. Gaia, mother of all, rose from the earth to bless them. May this bond hold heaven steady, she intoned, and may love temper power. The crowd erupted in praise. The sound rolled across the sky like an endless tide. Hera smiled, serene, distant, but within, her heart fluttered with a question she dared not voice: what happens when power no longer listens to love? The feast that followed blurred into legend. Dionysus filled goblets that never emptied. Apollo sang hymns that turned clouds to flame. Even Hades, from the shadows, toasted their union with rare solemnity. But beneath the laughter and music, Hera's thoughts drifted elsewhere. She watched Zeus move among gods and nymphs alike, laughter booming, presence magnetic. Every gaze turned toward him, drawn as moths to a divine flame. And in that moment, Hera realized something profound: to love Zeus was to share him with the world. The weight of it pressed on her like a crown that never loosened. Later, when the revelry quieted and the stars leaned close, Zeus led her to the balcony overlooking the mortal world. The night air was warm, scented with laurel and rain. Below them, the first temples flickered with mortal fire, small offerings to a pair of gods whose names they scarcely understood. They adore us, Zeus said softly. Their prayers give us form, their belief gives us eternity. They adore you, Hera corrected gently. I am feared. Revered, perhaps, but not loved. Zeus turned to her. Love will come. You will teach them what devotion means. She met his gaze. And you, will you learn it? The silence that followed was not cruel. It was worse, honest. Zeus brushed a hand along her cheek, lightning faintly humming beneath his skin. You are the only one who can challenge me, Hera. The only one who can calm the thunder. Then remember that, she said, voice steady. Because thunder without calm destroys everything beneath it. He smiled again, but this time it did not reach his eyes. As dawn approached, the first light of their new reign stretched across the horizon. The mortal world began to stir, crops sprouting, rivers swelling, the air thick with prayers. Olympus itself seemed alive, radiant with harmony. And yet, somewhere deep within the marble and gold, a crack had formed, invisible, but growing. Hera felt it in her bones, the same way sailors sense storms before the clouds darken. Love, like thunder, had its own cycles: brilliance, noise, silence. As she lay beside the king of gods that night, she gazed upward at the ceiling painted with constellations. Each star shimmered like an unspoken truth. She had become queen of heaven, but peace, she knew, was never permanent. For even in paradise, the sky cannot love without rain. In the beginning, it was subtle. A whisper carried on the breeze. A glance that lingered too long. The kind of small fracture that goes unnoticed, until one day, the whole sky splits open. Olympus had settled into rhythm. Zeus ruled from his high throne, Hera guided the affairs of gods and mortals alike. Together, they appeared unshakable, thunder and law, chaos and order in eternal harmony. To the mortal world, they were the perfect union, the model of fidelity. But perfection is the most fragile illusion of all. It began with stories brought to Hera's ears by the wind, stories of her husband descending to earth in disguise, of maidens who vanished into clouds, of mysterious births that rippled across kingdoms. She dismissed the first few tales. After all, the world was full of rumor, and Zeus was loved by all. But the whispers grew louder, their details sharper. One night, as the moon painted the marble halls in pale gold, Hera found herself unable to sleep. The laughter from the feast below echoed faintly, mingling with the distant hum of lyres. She rose and walked through the silent corridors, her white gown trailing behind her like mist. In the reflection of a polished pillar, she caught a glimpse, a flicker of movement outside the great balcony. Lightning flashed. For an instant, she saw him, Zeus, wrapped in mortal form, leaving Olympus under cover of storm. Her breath caught. Not in anger. In realization. The rumors were not lies. For hours she stood there, unmoving, watching the clouds he disturbed as he vanished toward the mortal world. The Queen of Heaven, silent and still, as her heart began to harden into marble. When Zeus returned at dawn, drenched in rain and arrogance, he smiled as though nothing had changed. "You were awake," he said softly. "I was watching," she replied. He paused, perhaps sensing the weight beneath her words. "You know I love you," he murmured. Hera looked into his eyes, searching for truth and finding only reflection. "You love," she said, "but you do not understand love." She turned away, and for the first time, Zeus did not follow. From that day, the air on Olympus changed. The songs of the muses grew softer, even the peacocks in Hera's garden seemed restless. Where laughter had once filled the halls, there lingered a quiet tension, invisible, but suffocating. And yet, Hera did not rage. Not yet. Her anger was too intelligent for outburst. Instead, she began to weave, not cloth, but memory. She observed. She listened. She watched the mortals who prayed to her for fidelity and justice, and she began to wonder, if gods could not honor vows, how could mortals ever hope to? When Zeus next descended to the world below, he chose a mortal woman of rare beauty, her name lost to time, her story swallowed by centuries. But her face would haunt Hera's dreams. She saw the way Zeus looked at her, not as a god looks upon a creation, but as a thief covets something forbidden. Jealousy, that most human of emotions, burned within Hera. But it was not the green fire of insecurity, it was the cold flame of betrayal. She was not envious of the mortal. She was enraged that loyalty, her domain, had been turned into mockery. The heavens mirrored her unrest. Clouds thickened, winds howled through temples, even the rivers below turned murky as if mourning their reflection of the gods. Mortals whispered prayers to calm her fury, offering sacrifices of doves and honey. Yet none could ease the storm she carried in her chest. Zeus returned again, triumphant and unrepentant. When Hera confronted him, his laughter echoed like thunder rolling across a valley. "You would cage lightning," he teased, but lightning was never meant to be tamed. Her eyes narrowed, and for a heartbeat, the sky itself seemed to tremble. "Then you mistake freedom for faithlessness," she said. "And you mistake my silence for forgiveness." Zeus's expression darkened. "You are my queen," he said, as if that should be enough. "And you," she replied, her voice low, "are my reminder that even gods can break their own laws." He turned away. Neither spoke again for days. But the silence did not last. Vengeance, quiet and deliberate, began to take root. Hera learned what it meant to wield anger not as chaos, but as instrument, to transform pain into purpose. She watched, she waited, she planned. When Zeus's next affair came, the one that would ignite legends, she was ready. Her heart no longer trembled at betrayal, it sharpened into something divine. Yet even as she prepared her retribution, a question flickered at the edge of her thoughts, haunting and unrelenting: could a goddess known for loyalty survive a world where even the gods were faithless? The first betrayal was not merely the breaking of vows. It was the birth of Hera's dual nature, the queen and the avenger, the guardian and the punisher. She would no longer simply uphold order. She would enforce it. And in doing so, she would begin to reshape Olympus itself. But when justice becomes personal, can it still remain divine? The winds that sweep through Olympus carry secrets, and this one came wrapped in thunder. Zeus had descended once more, not as king, not as husband, but as a shadow. His new infatuation was a mortal woman named Io, priestess of Hera herself. That detail made the wound deeper. Io's prayers were whispered in Hera's temples, her devotion sincere. She had poured honey and oil upon the queen's altars, never imagining that the god she feared most would soon covet her. When Hera first heard Io's name murmured in the corridors of Olympus, she dismissed it as mortal gossip. But gossip in Olympus is never wrong for long. Each retelling grew sharper, crueler, until one night, beneath a silver sky, she saw the truth with her own eyes. From the balcony above the mortal world, Hera gazed down upon a meadow lit by moonlight. There, in the tall grass, two figures shimmered, Zeus cloaked in mist, and beside him, a maiden trembling with both awe and terror. Hera did not cry out. She did not rage. She watched, silent as stone, while betrayal bloomed again. The next morning, Olympus woke to calm skies, an omen more dreadful than any storm. Hera's stillness frightened even the fates. She said nothing of what she'd seen, yet her attendants found her at her loom, weaving endlessly through the night. Threads of gold, white, and black coiled beneath her fingers like living things. Each pattern told a story, of loyalty broken, of love disguised, of justice waiting. When Zeus returned, he came cloaked in light, feigning innocence. "My queen," he began, voice smooth as rain, "the mortals are restless. I bring them blessings in your name." "In my name?" she echoed softly, still weaving. "Yes," he said, stepping closer. "A mortal girl, a priestess, builds a temple in your honor." Hera smiled faintly. "Her name is Io." The thunder faltered in his chest. Hera lifted her gaze from the loom, her eyes calm but cold. "Tell me, husband," she whispered, "what gift does she receive from the King of Heaven, devotion or deceit?" Zeus hesitated, then gestured, and in a flash of white light, Io appeared before them, transformed. Gone was the priestess, in her place stood a trembling white cow, her eyes still human, glistening with confusion. "It was to protect her," Zeus lied quickly. "You would have punished her for what she could not refuse." Hera rose from her loom, the golden thread slipping from her hands like rivers of light. "You mistake me," she said. "It is not her I wish to punish. It is you." Her hand brushed the air, and with a sound like a sigh, Hera summoned Argus Panoptes, the hundred-eyed guardian. His gaze never slept, his watchfulness was her justice made flesh. "Guard her," Hera commanded, "so that her innocence is not used again." Zeus said nothing. For once, he could find no thunder that did not sound like guilt. Days turned to weeks. Io wandered the meadows, her new form both protection and prison. Hera watched from afar, torn between compassion and pride. She pitied the girl, but pity, to Hera, was a kind of weakness she could not afford. Yet in the still hours of night, she dreamed of Io's tearful eyes and wondered, when justice becomes cruelty, does it still belong to the gods? Zeus could not bear his guilt. He sent Hermes, the trickster, to free the girl. In silence, the messenger lulled Argus to sleep with his music, one song at a time, until all 100 eyes closed forever. Then, with a single strike, he slew the guardian. When Hera discovered Argus's death, she did not scream. Instead, she took his eyes, each one a gem of unblinking loyalty, and pressed them into the feathers of her favorite bird. Thus was born the peacock, its tail shimmering with eternal vigilance. Every feather whispered of betrayal seen, of watchfulness that never dies. And yet, as the bird spread its jeweled fan before her, Hera felt no victory. Only emptiness. The gods celebrated Hermes's cleverness, the mortals sang of Zeus's mercy, but Hera's heart grew heavier. Justice had become vengeance, devotion had turned to obsession. Even the peacock's eyes, radiant and eternal, seemed to stare back at her in silent accusation. Io was freed, wandering far across the world, her path marked by rivers and seas. Wherever she walked, the land remembered her sorrow. Some said she became the ancestress of heroes, others said she faded into myth, her tears turning to dew. Hera never sought her again. But the lesson remained, the first true scar upon the heart of Olympus. The goddess of marriage had discovered what it meant to be betrayed, and the god of thunder had learned how far love could fall. From this story, mortals would learn to fear Hera's wrath, but few would understand the truth, that her vengeance was not born of cruelty, but of despair, the despair of being divine and still powerless before deceit. As night closed over Olympus once more, Hera returned to her loom. The threads glowed faintly in the dark, a tapestry of thunder, shadow, and sorrow. She whispered to the silence, "Let the world see what loyalty costs when love turns to illusion." Outside, a peacock cried, a haunting echo across the mountain's edge. But when even justice leaves wounds, who heals the heart of a goddess? The halls of Olympus were quiet after Argus's death, yet that silence was not peace, it was the hush of grief turned inward. Hera's anger had cooled, but in its place bloomed something colder, more enduring, remembrance. Everywhere she walked, she could still feel his loyalty. Argus had obeyed without question, a guardian of her will, a servant to her justice. 100 eyes had watched Io's suffering, not in cruelty, but in duty, until all were closed forever. For the first time, Hera realized that even obedience could perish in her service. The other gods whispered behind her back. Some pitied her, others feared her. Hera has become stone, they murmured. She feels only wrath. But they were wrong. The Queen of Heaven felt everything, too deeply, too constantly. Her pain was her crown, invisible but inescapable. She went to the place where Argus had fallen, a quiet glade at the edge of the mortal world. The grass was silvered with dew, and the air smelled faintly of rain. At her feet lay the remnants of his watch, the eyes that had seen all things and judged none. She knelt, gathering them with hands that trembled despite her immortal composure. Each one glowed faintly, reflecting not the world around her, but the memories they had kept, Io's tears, Zeus's deceit, Hera's own sorrow. "Loyalty should not die," she whispered. "Not like this." From her palm rose a soft golden light, and the eyes began to lift, circling her like sparks. As they spun faster, they merged into a shape, delicate feathers, iridescent, alive. And when the light faded, before her stood a bird unlike any other, feathers rich with emerald, sapphire, and gold, each plume marked by a single perfect eye. The peacock. It bowed to her, as if understanding its purpose. Hera smiled, a gesture touched with melancholy. "You will watch what I cannot," she said. "And you will remind the world that loyalty, once given, never truly dies." From that day, the peacock became her symbol, not of vanity, as mortals would later whisper, but of vigilance. Every eye upon its feathers was a promise, that Hera saw, that Hera remembered, that the Queen of Olympus might forgive but would never forget. When Hera returned to Olympus, the gods watched in uneasy silence as the bird followed her, its tail shimmering with Argus's legacy. Even Zeus paused, struck by its beauty and by the quiet dignity in Hera's bearing. For a fleeting moment, he saw her not as his rival or his queen, but as the balance he could never master, a living embodiment of consequence. Yet harmony was short-lived. Zeus, restless as ever, grew irritated by her silence. "You mourn too long," he said one day. Argus was but a servant. Hera turned to him slowly. And yet he was faithful. The words cut sharper than lightning. Zeus said nothing. That night, storms gathered without command. The clouds themselves seemed to weep, as though Olympus grieved with her. Hera sat by her loom once more, weaving the storm into her tapestry. Each thread shimmered like the feathers of her new companion, blue for loss, green for endurance, gold for vengeance withheld. She no longer sought to punish Zeus. What good was punishment to one who feared nothing? Instead, she began to transform her pain into purpose. mortals soon learned of her new symbol. Across Greece, artists carved peacocks into marble and painted them onto pottery. In Argos, her favorite city, priests released the sacred birds during festivals in her honor. To them, the peacock's eyes were not only Hera's watchfulness but the eyes of conscience itself, divine awareness that saw through falsehood. In time, the peacock would become her gift to humanity, a lesson hidden in beauty. Every vow has a witness, the bird seemed to say. Every betrayal leaves a mark that glitters long after guilt fades. Still, Hera could not silence her unease. At night, when the stars lay scattered like sparks from Hephaestus's forge, she would walk the colonnades alone, the peacock gliding behind her in ghostly grace. Its feathers caught the starlight, and in each eye she saw something new, not Io, not Argus, but herself. For perhaps, she thought, it was she who needed watching. Had her pursuit of justice crossed into obsession? Had her vengeance blinded her to mercy? These questions flickered like candlelight in her mind, never steady, never gone. One evening, as twilight turned the clouds to violet flame, the peacock let out a cry, sharp, echoing, alive. Hera turned, startled. In the reflection of its jeweled eyes, she saw a vision, Zeus, again descending toward the mortal realm, his form cloaked in stormlight. Her fingers clenched the marble rail. Anger rose like thunder behind her ribs, but this time, she did not act. She only watched. Because Hera had learned something the others had not. Vengeance is a circle. Chase it long enough, and it will return to you. The peacock settled at her side, its feathers folding into stillness. Hera exhaled, her voice barely above a whisper. Let him play among his shadows, she said. The storm always returns to the mountain. And somewhere far below, Zeus's laughter rolled across the clouds, the laughter of a god who believed himself untouchable. But above him, unseen, the queen of Olympus watched through 1,000 jeweled eyes. For even when trust is broken, memory never sleeps. The years after Argus's death brought no peace. Zeus's wanderings grew more frequent, and each new whisper that reached Hera's ears cut deeper than the last. Yet instead of breaking her, the pain hardened her, until her composure was marble, her voice thunders calm before the strike. But one betrayal would wound her differently than all the rest. It would not come from Olympus, nor from a goddess, but from a mortal, a man whose name would echo through eternity, Heracles. He was born of Zeus and a mortal queen, Alcmene, a woman so virtuous that even Hera once favored her prayers. When Hera learned of Alcmene's pregnancy, the truth came not through gossip or divine messenger, but through a dream that began with lightning and ended with an infant's cry echoing through Olympus. She awoke in darkness, her heart heavy with foreknowledge. Another child of deceit, she whispered. Another wound to the vow he swore before the fates. But this child was not ordinary. Even before birth, the air trembled around him, as though destiny itself braced for impact. Hera saw in him not merely Zeus's sin, but Zeus's legacy, a mortal born from divine arrogance, destined to become immortal through suffering. The irony was unbearable. The goddess of family and fidelity faced the living emblem of infidelity, and the world would adore him for it. Still, Hera did not rage blindly. She plotted with precision. The first act of vengeance was quiet, a delay. Hera descended unseen to the mortal world, cloaking herself in mist. She visited the goddess of childbirth, Eileithyia, and whispered, "Hold back Alcmene's labor until the dawn of my choosing." And so, as Alcmene cried out in agony, time itself hesitated. Meanwhile, another descendant of Zeus, Eurystheus, was born early, claiming the throne that fate had promised to Heracles. Hera smiled at the symmetry. Justice, she thought, sometimes wears cruel disguises. When Heracles was finally born, Zeus's joy split the heavens. Hera watched from Olympus, her expression unreadable. Zeus boasted of his son's strength, his destined greatness, his blood divine. The gods celebrated, all except her. That night, Hera's vengeance took form in a darker shape. She sent 2 serpents slithering into the infant's cradle, symbols of her wrath, silent and merciless. The palace awoke to screams, but when the mortals arrived, the snakes were already dead, crushed in the tiny fists of the laughing child. Even as she watched from the clouds, Hera could not help but feel a flicker of awe. "You defy even me," she whispered. "Then let your life prove what strength costs." Heracles grew into a man whose power rivaled the gods, but every triumph carried Hera's shadow. She haunted his path not out of cruelty alone, but out of fear. For if the world adored a child born of betrayal, what did that say of Olympus? What did that say of her? The more he achieved, the more her anger turned inward. Mortals prayed to him, not her. Shrines once devoted to the Queen of Heaven now echoed with songs of the divine hero. And Zeus, proud beyond restraint, basked in reflected glory. But Hera saw the truth. Heracles was not born of divine purpose, he was born of divine mistake. And in her mind, mistakes demanded correction. When at last Heracles married and built his home, Hera watched the peace in his eyes with something close to envy. He had found contentment, a treasure denied even to gods. That would not last. It could not. She whispered to the winds that haunt mortal dreams, and they carried madness into his heart. One evening, as the sun sank behind the hills, Heracles saw enemies where there were none, his wife and children. In the grip of Hera's delusion, he destroyed all he loved. When the trance broke, horror filled him like poison. From Olympus, Hera watched him fall to his knees, his cries echoing through the mountains. Her vengeance had succeeded, and yet, victory tasted like ash. For the first time, she understood what it meant to pity her own creation. Heracles would later seek redemption, submitting himself to 12 impossible labors, trials of strength and spirit that would cleanse his soul. To mortals, these would become tales of heroism. To Hera, they were confessions, each one a reminder that justice without mercy becomes its own cruelty. When Heracles faced the Nemean lion, she sent it with pride, expecting his death. Yet when he returned draped in its hide, she felt not rage but something startling, admiration. He had survived what should have destroyed him. Over time, Hera's hatred turned to fascination. She began to watch him differently, not as her enemy, but as a mirror of herself. Both had been betrayed by Zeus. Both were bound to vengeance. Both carried burdens they could not put down. When at last Heracles completed his labors and ascended to Olympus, the world held its breath. Would Hera destroy him? Or would the storm finally break? Zeus stood beside her, triumphant. "He has earned his place among us," he said. Hera's eyes softened, though her voice stayed calm. "Then let him sit beside me," she said. "Let the son of your deceit become the proof of my endurance." And so, she welcomed Heracles to Olympus, not with love, but with acceptance. The circle was complete. Vengeance had burned itself to exhaustion, leaving only understanding. That night, as she gazed across the stars, Hera finally whispered what she had long denied: perhaps the gods are not meant to be worshipped, but to be warned. Her peacock cried softly from the shadows, its jeweled eyes glinting in approval. But when vengeance ends, what remains to fill the silence? Forgiveness, or fate's next design? The winds that swept across Thebes carried no sound of prophecy, only the quiet rhythm of peace, the kind of peace that trembles before it shatters. Heracles, scarred and redeemed by his labors, had returned home. His strength was legendary, his name whispered with reverence. Yet Hera, watching from Olympus, felt unease curl through her like smoke. Peace, to the Queen of Gods, had always been an illusion, a calm sea before thunder breaks. Heracles had survived every trial she'd set before him. He had conquered monsters, cleansed lands, even defied death itself. The mortals sang that Hera's rage was spent, that the goddess had forgiven the son she once despised. They built temples to Heracles' glory, not knowing that forgiveness is not the same as peace. Hera's anger had cooled, yes, but beneath the calm, a deeper question grew. Could the balance of Olympus endure if mortals began to rival the gods? Heracles, adored and worshipped, was becoming something dangerous, an idea. A reminder that even divine wrath could forge greatness. Zeus, proud and blind to consequence, celebrated his son's triumphs. "He brings honor to us all," he boasted. "Even to you, my queen." Hera said nothing, though her silence thundered louder than his praise. Honor built on betrayal was no honor at all. Yet she could not bring herself to hate Heracles anymore. He was, after all, her own creation, her vengeance, her lesson, her reflection. Still, the threads of destiny had other plans. It began with a whisper, soft as breath, slipping into Heracles' dreams. The gods of madness, those subtle servants of Hera's will, spun illusions through his sleep. At first, he saw visions of old monsters, the Nemean lion, the Hydra's writhing heads, the stables of Augeas. But the faces changed. The monsters wore crowns, then mortal smiles, then, finally, the faces of his wife and children. He awoke in terror, sweat running down his scarred skin. But the visions did not fade. He heard laughter where there was silence, saw betrayal where there was love. The curse deepened, creeping from dream into daylight. That night, Thebes shook with screams. Neighbors awoke to the sound of breaking wood, the clash of bronze. When dawn rose, Heracles knelt amid ruin, his strength spent, his arms stained with the blood of those he loved most. His wife. His sons. When Hera saw what had happened, even she drew back from the vision. The act was too cruel, even for her vengeance. Yet she knew this was no accident, it was the completion of her own design, a consequence too vast to undo. For the first time in eternity, Hera pitied him. The man she had hated had become the living embodiment of her curse, a creature who could destroy everything he loved, not from evil, but from blindness. The other gods turned away in sorrow. Zeus raged, not at Hera, but at fate. "This is not justice," he cried. Hera's reply was quiet. "No. It is truth." Heracles wandered the mortal world after that, broken and hollow. The songs of his victories turned to laments. Wherever he walked, people whispered, not in praise, but in awe and fear. He had faced beasts and conquered them, but now he carried the heaviest burden, guilt that even immortality could not wash clean. And yet, in the deepest part of her heart, Hera watched him still. For though he was cursed, he did not surrender. He sought penance. He begged the oracle at Delphi to tell him how to atone. And when the voice of Apollo spoke, commanding him to serve his cousin Eurystheus, the king who had stolen his destiny, Hera felt something shift within her. This was not cruelty now. This was transformation. Every labor he performed, every humiliation endured, stripped him of pride and filled him with understanding. As he cleaned the filth of stables or captured monsters born from divine spite, Hera began to see something she had never seen before, humility in strength, divinity in endurance. From her throne on Olympus, she whispered to the winds, "Perhaps I have punished him not to destroy him, but to reveal him." When Heracles completed his final labor, bringing back Cerberus from the underworld, even Hades bowed his head in reluctant respect. Hera watched as the hero led the monstrous hound through the mortal realm, chains in hand, courage unbroken. The sight humbled her. For in him, she saw the proof of her own paradox, that suffering, not privilege, makes the divine truly immortal. After the labors ended, Heracles sought death, weary of the weight he carried. Some say Hera, watching from the heavens, wept, though no mortal would ever believe that the queen of Olympus could shed tears. But perhaps it was not tears that fell that night, but rain, warm, unending, merciful. When Zeus raised Heracles to Olympus as a god, Hera stood beside the throne, silent. The hero approached her, bowing low. "Goddess," he said, "I have wronged you by my birth, but I have lived by your lesson. Grant me your peace." The peacock's eyes gleamed in the candlelight. Hera looked at him long, and for the first time in all eternity, she smiled without bitterness. "You are no longer the reminder of my pain," she said. You are the proof that even vengeance can give birth to wisdom. And as the hall filled with divine light, Hera reached out and placed a crown of laurel upon his brow, the same wreath Zeus had once worn at their own wedding. The cycle was complete. From that day forward, mortals would speak not of Hera's cruelty, but of her justice, not of Heracles' sin, but of his redemption. Their myth became one, woven together like thunder and rain, destructive, cleansing, eternal. As the stars glowed above Olympus, Hera whispered into the night, more to herself than to any god who might listen. Every storm must break, even mine. But when a goddess learns mercy, does the world grow safer, or simply quieter before its next tempest? There are moments when even gods invite their own ruin, when pride becomes a prayer too loud for fate to ignore. The judgment of Paris began not in war or betrayal but in celebration, a wedding meant to bind peace forever. Peleus and Thetis, a mortal king and a sea goddess, were to be married. Every god was summoned to their feast, every divine hand offered gifts, except one. Eris, the goddess of discord, was left uninvited. And from that slight, the seeds of 1,000 funerals were sown. In a flash of malice, Eris cast a single golden apple into the banquet hall. Upon it were engraved 3 words that would ignite the world, to the fairest. The apple rolled between goblets and plates of ambrosia until it came to rest before 3 goddesses, Aphrodite, Athena, and Hera. The music stopped. Laughter died. Every eye turned to them. Athena stood tall, her armor glimmering like dawn on bronze. I am the fairest, she declared. Wisdom is beauty of the mind. Aphrodite smiled, her voice a soft flute in a crowded room. Wisdom is cold, she said. Love warms all things. The apple is mine. Then Hera rose. No armor, no seduction, only the weight of her presence. Fairness, she said quietly, is not given. It is earned by power and honor. If any goddess has kept the order of this world, it is I. Zeus, sitting upon his throne of lightning, felt the air tighten. He knew better than to choose between them. To favor one would mean war among all. So he did what cowards often do, he passed judgment to someone else. Let a mortal decide, he said. Let man choose which virtue he adores most. And so, the 3 goddesses descended to earth, to the green valleys of Troy, where a young shepherd named Paris kept his flocks unaware of the storm that would soon bear his name. When they appeared before him, the mountain itself seemed to bow. Paris fell to his knees, blinded by their radiance. They spoke in turn, each offering a gift that no mortal could refuse. Athena promised victory in war, honor and conquest. Aphrodite offered love, the most beautiful woman on earth. And Hera, queen of heaven, offered what no man had ever held, power, dominion over nations, a kingdom to outshine all others. Paris listened, heart pounding. The world itself waited for his decision. In the end, it was not wisdom or power he chose, but desire. He gave the apple to Aphrodite. And in that moment, Hera's smile froze to ice. The sky darkened. The mountain shook. Not even Aphrodite's perfumed grace could mask the chill that followed Hera's gaze. When she spoke, her voice was not loud, but it carried to every corner of heaven. So be it, she said. Let beauty be your doom. From that choice would spring the greatest war the world had ever seen. Aphrodite's reward to Paris was Helen, queen of Sparta, and her abduction would burn cities and shatter kingdoms. For Hera, the judgment of Paris was not just an insult, it was a reminder that mortals and gods alike valued appearance over truth, impulse over order. And that realization cut deeper than any betrayal Zeus had ever given her. From that day, she vowed that Troy, the city of Paris, the city blessed by Aphrodite, would fall. Not for vanity, but for balance. Hera's vengeance was never petty, it was principle turned to flame. On Olympus, she called upon Athena, who had been slighted too. Together, Hera said, we will teach them the cost of choice. And Athena nodded, her grey eyes hard as stone. The two goddesses watched as Aphrodite guided Paris back to Troy with his stolen bride. Each step he took echoed toward inevitable tragedy. To mortals, it would seem that Hera's fury was for jealousy alone, but those who listened closely to the winds knew better. She did not wage war for beauty. She waged war for truth. Because when a man chooses desire over justice, it is not just his city that falls, it is the very order of the world. And so, as the gods prepared their alliances and heroes armed for battle, Hera stood upon the edge of the clouds, her peacock beside her, its eyes reflecting the fires to come. The Queen of Heaven did not weep, did not rage. She merely waited. For time always delivers justice to those patient enough to watch. Below, in Troy, Helen looked out over the sea, the horizon already dark with ships. The wind smelled of salt and destiny. Hera closed her eyes and spoke to the storm. Let their beauty be their punishment. Let their love be their undoing. And as lightning split the sky, the first notes of war rang across the world, a war born not of hate, but of a wounded truth. But when the gods make men their instruments, who plays the final note, the divine, or the damned? The winds that carried the scent of the Aegean were thick with omen. Ships, 1,000 of them, cut across the sea like blades, their sails fat with vengeance. From Sparta to Mycenae, from Ithaca to Thessaly, mortals prepared for a war they thought was theirs. But far above, on Olympus, it was the gods who drew the first breath of conflict. Hera watched it unfold from her marble throne, the peacock resting beside her, its jeweled eyes glinting in the stormlight. The judgment of Paris had not been forgotten. Each day that the Trojan prince lived in pleasure beside Helen was an insult carved into the bones of heaven. Athena stood beside Hera, silent, her armor gleaming cold. Aphrodite shields him, she said. Her love is his armor. Then let love burn, Hera replied. Even the brightest flame consumes itself. Below, the Greeks raised their banners. At their head stood Agamemnon, proud and hungry for conquest, and Menelaus, the wronged husband who sought to reclaim his queen. Yet few of them understood that they marched not only for glory, but as pawns in a divine feud. Zeus watched in uneasy stillness. He had sworn to remain neutral, though his eyes betrayed a father's fear. He knew Hera's anger, and he knew Athena's cunning. But even he could not unmake what vanity had begun. On the morning the Greeks landed at Troy, Hera's voice rippled through the clouds. Let them test their strength, she said. Let them believe they fight for honor. In truth, they fight for justice denied. And so, the Trojan War began, 10 years of blood, legend, and consequence. At first, the gods played gently. Athena whispered courage into the hearts of Greek warriors. Aphrodite veiled the Trojans in charm and beauty. Hera sent favorable winds to the Greeks, guiding their ships to Troy's shores. Each divine hand moved unseen, yet every arrow, every sword stroke bore the mark of Olympus. In the war's early days, Hera's satisfaction was quiet but certain. Troy's walls trembled, its people frightened, its allies scattered. She appeared in dreams to kings and commanders, her words soft but commanding. Fight for justice, she told them, and Olympus will favor your name. But as years passed, even Hera began to see the cost. Mortals who prayed to her by name, wives, mothers, daughters, wept beneath the ruins of their own homes. Temples once built in her honor stood blackened by fire. The prayers that rose to her were no longer for justice, but for mercy. And still, she could not stop. Because beneath her wrath was something deeper, the belief that this war, this endless burning, might restore balance to the heavens. Troy was the embodiment of choice without consequence, of beauty without virtue. To destroy it was to prove that even desire must answer to order. One night, when the stars hung low and red with smoke, Hera visited Zeus as he brooded over the clouds. The world burns, he said. And you would have it so. I would have it right, Hera answered. He turned, thunder in his voice. At what cost? She met his gaze without fear. The cost of forgetting that even love must kneel before justice. Their eyes locked, lightning against marble calm, until the air itself trembled. Then Zeus looked away, weary, and said only, "You will not like what your justice becomes." Down below, on the plains of Troy, heroes clashed, Achilles, swift as fire, and Hector, noble as dawn. Hera favored Achilles, whispering strength into his heart as he drove the Trojans back. She had no love for mortals, but she understood this one. His rage was her mirror, pure, relentless, divine. When Hector fell beneath Achilles' spear, the gods themselves turned their faces. Even the fates paused their weaving. Hera watched the city that had insulted her crumble inch by inch, its beauty devoured by the hunger of men. And still, in the silence after each victory, she felt something hollow. Each cry of triumph sounded more like mourning. When Troy finally burned, its towers collapsing, its women led away in chains, Hera stood on the edge of Olympus, the flames reflected in her eyes. Athena joined her. Neither goddess spoke. There was no joy in conquest, only inevitability. Zeus approached, his expression unreadable. "You have your justice," he said. Hera looked down at the smoldering ruins. "Justice is never clean," she murmured. "It leaves ash, even in heaven." For a long time, the queen of Olympus said nothing more. She simply watched as the smoke curled toward the stars, prayers, curses, and souls all rising together. In that moment, Hera understood the cruel symmetry of power. To maintain order, she had become what she once despised. The goddess who punished hubris had waged war through it. And yet, the mortals would remember her not as tyrant, but as force. The one who stood for law in a world addicted to chaos. When the fires finally dimmed, Hera whispered to the peacock beside her, "Let them rebuild. Let them learn that beauty cannot last without truth." The bird spread its jeweled feathers, the eyes shimmering with reflected flame. Below, the Aegean turned red with dawn. The war had ended, but its echoes would never fade. They would pass from myth to history, from story to scripture, a warning wrapped in glory. For mortals would never forget that even the fairest of gifts, when touched by divine pride, can destroy worlds. And above it all, Hera sat in silence, the queen who had won her vengeance, and lost her peace. But can a goddess who creates order ever escape the chaos required to defend it? Peace returned to Olympus, but it was an uneasy peace, brittle, like glass struck too many times. The Trojan War had ended, yet the echoes of it lingered in every temple, in every prayer. Mortals rebuilt their cities, sang hymns of the gods, but Hera could feel the weariness behind their words. They no longer feared chaos. They feared the gods themselves. Zeus, as always, basked in the aftermath. The war had proven his dominion once again, his thunder, his command, his inevitability. Yet the Queen of Heaven, who had watched whole kingdoms burn in his name, saw not glory but arrogance. The same arrogance that once devoured their father, Kronos. It was a subtle thing at first, the way Zeus dismissed counsel, the way his decrees grew swifter, harsher. He had tasted worship like wine, and it had gone to his head. Hera's throne, beside his, seemed smaller each passing day. She spoke, and he interrupted. She ruled, and he overruled. But Hera had learned patience long ago, in Kronos' belly, in the years of betrayal, in the centuries of quiet endurance. She knew that even thunder could be trapped, if one was clever enough to weave the right kind of storm. Whispers began among the gods. Athena noticed it first, sharp-eyed and calculating. "He no longer listens," she said to Hera one night. "He commands as if Olympus were his alone." Hera replied softly, "Then perhaps he must be reminded it is not." And so began a conspiracy born not of rebellion, but of necessity. Hera, Athena, and Poseidon, the three pillars of Olympus's reason, met beneath the shroud of cloud and secrecy. Each had their reasons: Poseidon, weary of his brother's pride; Athena, offended by injustice; Hera, desperate for balance. Their plan was simple in concept, impossible in consequence. they would bind the king of gods himself. When dawn rose, Zeus sat upon his throne, unaware. Hera approached him, her voice honeyed, her expression calm. "My lord," she said, "you labor too greatly. Rest, if only for a moment. Let me tend to Olympus while you dream." Zeus smiled, weary but indulgent. "You would rule in my stead?" "Only until your strength returns," she replied, bowing low. He laughed, lightning flickering faintly at his fingertips. "Very well, my queen. Rule as you will, but remember who gave you the crown." Hera's smile never faltered. "How could I forget? When he slept, the trap was sprung. Poseidon's chains, forged in the depths of the sea, rose from beneath the marble floor. Athena's cunning wove enchantments through them, stronger than iron, stronger even than fate. And Hera, with her own hand, clasped the final link around his wrist. The thunder ceased. For the first time since the birth of the world, the sky was silent. No lightning split the clouds. No storms answered prayers. Olympus held its breath. When Zeus awoke, the heavens trembled. "What is this treachery?" he roared, his voice cracking mountains. But the chains held. Hera stood before him, calm as stone. "This is not treachery," she said. "It is correction. You have forgotten that a king's power comes from balance, not fear." Zeus strained against the bonds, his rage splitting the air. "You dare bind me, woman? You, who sit upon my throne by my grace?" Hera's gaze did not waver. "I sit beside you because the world requires law as much as thunder. You have made yourself tyrant, and I will not watch Olympus fall into ruin again." The other gods gathered, torn between awe and terror. Some whispered that Hera had gone too far, that to chain Zeus was to challenge the order of the cosmos. Others saw in her act not rebellion, but courage, the first rebellion born of justice rather than ambition. But justice, even divine, demands a price. From the depths of the sea, Poseidon heard the cry of his brother's fury and faltered. "We have gone too far," he murmured. Athena disagreed. He would never learn restraint if not for consequence. Yet Hera saw it then, in the burning of Zeus's eyes, the trembling of the heavens. This was not victory. This was a mistake repeating itself. Just as Kronos had swallowed his children for fear of losing control, she had chained her husband for the same reason. When Hephaestus, her son, limped into the hall, the god she had once cast from Olympus, he looked at his father's chains and then at his mother's face. "Do you not see?" he said softly. "You are both prisoners, one of pride, the other of fear." Those words struck deeper than any thunderbolt. Hera's composure cracked, if only for an instant. Zeus saw it, and though his fury still burned, something human flickered within it. "Release me," he said, "and let this storm end before it consumes us all." Hera hesitated. For the first time in eternity, she saw not a rival but a mirror, another being trapped by the expectations of divinity. She raised her hand, and with a whisper, the chains dissolved into mist. Zeus stood free once more. The air trembled with tension, the world waiting for judgment. Yet instead of rage, he said only, "You sought to teach me balance. Perhaps I have learned it." He looked upon her with something dangerously close to respect. Hera bowed her head, neither in apology nor in defiance, but in understanding. For even gods must sometimes break their own laws to remember why they exist. Later, as night blanketed Olympus, Hera stood at the edge of the clouds, her peacock at her side. Its eyes glowed faintly, reflecting lightning that no longer struck in anger but in rhythm, like a heartbeat. She whispered into the wind, "Power without restraint destroys. Restraint without courage dies." The storm passed quietly across the sky, the lesson written in thunder for any who would listen. But when gods learn humility, does the universe grow gentler, or only more aware of its fragility? The chains had fallen, but their echoes still clung to Olympus. The thunder returned, quieter, tempered, yet in every rumble lay memory of defiance. Hera and Zeus sat side by side once more, the sky deceptively calm above them. But the calm after a storm is not peace, it is the breath a tempest takes before it begins again. Hera knew this. She felt it in the air, the thick, uncertain weight of consequence. Her plan had succeeded, yet the victory left her hollow. For though she had freed the world from Zeus's tyranny, she had also exposed herself, the queen who would bind her king. The other gods whispered now not in awe, but in fear. To bind the thunder was to prove it could be bound again. The hierarchy that had once seemed eternal now trembled, and in that trembling, Zeus found new strength. He spoke little at first. Silence can be sharper than words. Days passed before he called her name. Hera. She turned, wary. You have your freedom. What more do you seek? Zeus's eyes, still clouded with anger, softened only slightly. Freedom means nothing when the chains still echo. She met his gaze, unflinching. Then perhaps remember the sound the next time you mistake obedience for loyalty. Zeus rose from his throne. The room seemed smaller when he stood, not because he grew larger, but because the air itself obeyed him. You forget, he said slowly, that loyalty cannot be ruled. It must be earned. Then earn it, Hera whispered. For a heartbeat, thunder trembled behind his eyes. The gods watched, breathless, as two forces that had shaped creation itself, storm and law, stood inches apart, bound by everything they could not undo. Then, something extraordinary happened. Zeus did not strike her. He did not roar or summon lightning. Instead, he stepped back. Perhaps, he said, it is not Olympus I have lost control of, but myself. Hera blinked, uncertain. This was not the tone of the conqueror who had once chained the heavens to his will. It was something rarer, humility. Zeus turned away, walking toward the edge of the clouds. When Kronos fell, I swore never to become him, he said quietly. Yet in time, every ruler becomes the tyrant he defeats. You reminded me before it was too late. The wind stirred Hera's golden veil, carrying the faint scent of rain. She wanted to answer, but her words would not come. For the first time, she saw her husband not as the symbol of power, but as a man who had learned the cost of it. Days turned into seasons. Slowly, the rhythm of Olympus began to heal. Zeus shared his decrees with the council again, and Hera's voice regained its rightful place beside his. The heavens resumed their balance, but the scars remained, not wounds of flesh, but lessons etched into eternity. Still, not all were satisfied. Poseidon grumbled that Zeus had grown weak. Ares, ever restless, longed for the thunder's old fury. A god without fear, he said, is a god without respect. Hera overheard and smiled. Respect born of fear dies the moment the storm passes. Ares, unused to wisdom from anyone but himself, fell silent. Yet Hera knew peace could not be trusted. Not entirely. Even as Zeus sought redemption, she sensed a shadow stirring, not outside Olympus, but within it. The gods had tasted rebellion, and rebellion, once fed, is hard to starve. So she did what she always had, she prepared. Quietly. Patiently. One evening, when the clouds were painted in amber and violet, Zeus approached her again. No crown, no armor, only the weight of sincerity in his voice. You do not trust me, he said. Hera did not answer immediately. Instead, she turned to the horizon, where the mortal world shimmered beneath the dying light. Trust, she said at last, is not a gift. It is a habit. One you break often. Zeus nodded, accepting the truth without defense. Then let me rebuild it. Not with promises, but with time. Something in his tone disarmed her. Hera studied his face, the face that had inspired empires, the voice that commanded storms. Yet for all his grandeur, he looked almost mortal in that moment, vulnerable in a way that gods were never meant to be. She exhaled slowly. You once asked me what balance means, she said. I know now. It means neither of us wins. He smiled faintly. Then perhaps, at last, we both have. The words settled between them, fragile but true. As night fell, Hera walked alone to her garden. The peacock followed, its feathers rustling softly in the twilight. She looked up at the stars, countless, steady, indifferent. For centuries, she had believed that order was strength, that justice was clarity. But now, she began to see the truth: order could exist only in motion, justice only through mercy. The stars reflected in her eyes like fragments of her own crown. Perhaps, she murmured, to unbind another, one must unbind oneself. From the shadows, the peacock spread its feathers, each jeweled eye gleaming like memory: Argus, Io, Heracles, the wars, the chains, all of it, watching her, reminding her. She had been goddess, wife, warrior, judge. But now, for the first time, she felt something beyond them all. Peace, fragile but real. The next morning, Zeus rose before dawn. For the first time in ages, his thunder was gentle, rolling softly over the sleeping world like distant applause. Hera listened, and for once, did not brace for the storm. She smiled. "Let him roar," she whispered. "So long as he remembers who quieted the sky." And so, the king and queen of Olympus ruled anew, not in harmony, but in understanding, which is rarer still. The world below flourished, unaware that its peace hung upon two immortal hearts learning how to bend without breaking. But how long can even gods hold balance, when the weight of eternity never shifts? There are stories the poets tell only in half-whispers, tales not of love or war, but of creation born from defiance. Hera's next act would not shake Olympus with thunder, but with silence. For silence, when it hides purpose, is the most dangerous sound of all. In the years following Zeus's unbinding, peace hung over the heavens like morning mist, delicate, deceptive. The balance between king and queen had been restored, but it was fragile, trembling at every breath. To the gods, it appeared that Hera had softened. To Hera herself, it felt more like stillness before change. She had watched Zeus for eons, his strength, his vanity, his endless need to create through conquest. He made children with mortals, with nymphs, with goddesses alike, scattering his lineage across the world as proof of his divinity. Yet each act of creation reminded Hera of what she was denied: the power to bring life without him. That denial became a seed, small, bitter, and unyielding. In the still hours of night, when even the stars slept, Hera sat before her loom, weaving not cloth but thought. "If the king may create in defiance of vows," she whispered, "then the queen shall do the same, and not through desire, but will." And thus began an act no goddess had ever dared. From her breath, she drew flame. From her tears, iron. From her own immortal flesh, she shaped a child, one born of no father, conceived from her pride and pain. The labor was not mortal agony, but something deeper, like the tearing of the soul from its own order. When it was done, she looked upon the child and faltered. He was imperfect. The infant, Hephaestus, was beautiful only in spirit. His body was twisted, his leg lame, his cry uneven. Hera froze. This was not the radiant proof of divine creation she had imagined. This was flaw, and flaw, in the eyes of Olympus, was failure. Her first instinct was not love. It was shame. In that moment, she heard the echo of Zeus's laughter in her mind, not real, but remembered. He would mock this child, she thought. He would call my power broken. Pride and fear tangled like roots inside her. She could not bear it, not the pity, not the whispers, not the proof that even a goddess could create imperfection. So she did the unthinkable. She lifted the child in trembling arms, walked to the edge of the heavens, and cast him from Olympus. He fell for a day and a night, his cry fading into the sea below. There, the ocean goddess Thetis found him, broken but alive, and hid him in her grotto. She raised him not with pity, but with purpose, teaching him the beauty of what endures when strength fails. While Olympus forgot him, Hephaestus remembered everything. The fall. The rejection. The mother who could not bear to look at him. Yet from that pain, he forged mastery. He learned the language of metal, the patience of stone. His hands, though scarred, built wonders. From fire and forge, he birthed beauty no god could match. Years passed. Hera did not speak of the child again. But sometimes, in dreams, she heard hammering beneath the sea, soft, steady, defiant. She told herself it was the pulse of the world. Yet deep down, she knew whose hand struck those rhythms. One evening, long after the war of Troy and the unbinding of Zeus, she walked alone through her garden. The air shimmered strangely, heavy with a golden glow. The scent of molten metal drifted on the breeze. Then, before her, the air rippled, and from it stepped a figure she had long buried in memory. Hephaestus. Grown, tall, his body still marked by its imperfection, but his eyes bright with unyielding fire. Behind him rolled a cart of gleaming works, thrones of gold, cups that shimmered with trapped sunlight, chains finer than silk and stronger than destiny. "Mother," he said simply. "I have returned." Hera's breath caught. For the first time in centuries, she could not find words. "You live," she managed at last. "I do more than live," he said. "I create. As you once did." She stepped closer, searching his face for anger, for accusation. There was none. Only quiet strength. "You made all this," she whispered. He nodded. "Every scar is a forge, every wound a hammer. You gave me both." Hera turned her face away, shame rising in her throat. "I cast you out." Hephaestus smiled, not cruelly, but with a strange peace. "And in falling, I learned how to rise. The world below gave me what Olympus never could, purpose." From his cart, he drew a golden throne unlike any other, intricate, radiant, alive with craftsmanship so fine it seemed woven from light itself. "A gift," he said. "For you." Hera hesitated, then sat upon it. The moment she did, invisible bindings coiled around her arms and legs, soft as silk, unbreakable as fate. She gasped, realizing too late the throne was a trap. Hephaestus bowed his head. "I am your creation," he said. "And like all creation, I reflect my maker." For a heartbeat, silence reigned, until Hera began to laugh. Not mockery, but recognition. "Then I have truly made a god," she said. "One who teaches his mother as she once taught the world." Hephaestus released her, his magic dissolving in a shimmer of gold. "Even perfection must be bound," he said, "to remember what freedom costs." She stood, placing a hand on his cheek. "And even imperfection," she replied, "can become divine." When he departed, Hera remained in the garden long after, her reflection caught in the polished metal of the throne. She saw herself not as queen or wife, but as creator, flawed, fallible, and, for the first time, complete. Above Olympus, lightning flickered faintly, not in anger, but in reverence. Even Zeus, watching from afar, did not interrupt. For in that moment, the gods learned something rare, that divinity does not come from being perfect, but from daring to create despite imperfection. And Hera, who had cast her child from heaven, felt the smallest ember of forgiveness take root, not for him, but for herself. But can even a goddess truly forgive what she once destroyed, or must she learn to live with the beauty her mistakes create? When the sound of hammers began to echo through Olympus, it was as if the mountain itself remembered something it had long forgotten, the pulse of creation. Each strike rose from the deep caves below, steady, deliberate, like the heartbeat of the world. The gods, at first, thought it thunder. Hera knew better. Her son had returned. Word spread like wildfire, the lame god who had once been cast from heaven now forged wonders that outshone even Apollo's light. Mortals prayed to him for craft, for endurance, for the courage to build beauty from pain. On altars of bronze, they whispered his name, Hephaestus, the divine smith, the fire tamer, the child of rejection turned master of flame. Hera heard the prayers. Each one was a blade, not because they praised him, but because they remembered him. Her temples filled with offerings made from his hands. Golden bowls, silver filigree, weapons too perfect for war. She held one once, a chalice so fine it reflected her face as though accusing her. Zeus, intrigued, sent Hermes to fetch the craftsman back to Olympus. But Hephaestus refused. "I return only when the queen herself calls me," he said. "The one who cast me down must be the one to lift me." The words reached Hera like a soft thunderclap. Pride warred with remorse inside her. To summon him would mean admitting her flaw, not as goddess, but as mother. And yet, the sound of his hammers never ceased, each strike was a summons of its own. One night, Hera stood alone upon her balcony, the peacock asleep nearby. The moonlight glazed the marble in silver. Below, the fires of Hephaestus glimmered like fallen stars. She whispered into the wind, "Come home." The next morning, the sky split open. From the clouds rose a chariot of bronze drawn by winged serpents, molten light trailing behind. Hephaestus arrived not as a discarded son, but as a god complete. His face was calm, his limp steady, his hands still scarred, yet he radiated authority even Zeus respected. He stepped before Hera, bowing slightly. "You called." "I did," she answered. "Olympus has forgotten who built its glory." Hephaestus smiled faintly. "And you? Have you?" Hera met his gaze. "Every day." Silence stretched between them, not awkward, but reverent, like the space between lightning and thunder. Then Hephaestus reached into his forge cart and drew forth a gift, a crown unlike any the gods had ever seen. Its gold was mixed with iron, its gems forged from cooled lightning. It gleamed with the duality of strength and humility. "I made this," he said, "from the remnants of my fall. From stone that broke my bones, from fire that healed them." Hera hesitated. "You would give this to me?" He nodded. "Because you taught me that even what is cast away can be reforged. This is not forgiveness, mother. It is remembrance." Her eyes softened. She took the crown, feeling its weight, not heavy, but balanced. "Then let Olympus wear memory upon its head," she said quietly. Zeus descended then, drawn by the radiance. When he saw the forge god, pride lit his face. "My son," he proclaimed, "return to your rightful place." Hephaestus turned to him, his tone calm but edged with truth. "Rightful? You mean useful. Even gods value the broken when they make something beautiful of it." Zeus frowned, and used to defiance from those beneath him. But Hera stepped forward, her voice carrying like wine through temple halls. "He speaks the truth. Power alone does not sustain Olympus, creation does. The hands that build hold greater dominion than those that merely command." For once, Zeus had no retort. He watched as Hephaestus knelt before the anvil he had brought and struck it once. Sparks scattered like stars, and from them rose a throne forged for the smith god himself, strong, humble, radiant. The gods gathered, whispering. Some scoffed, how could the lame one sit among them? Others, watching Hera's proud stillness, began to understand. Olympus was changing. It would never admit weakness again, but it might begin to honor what weakness could create. Later, as the celebration died down, Hera visited the forge where Hephaestus worked. The walls glowed with reflected fire, and the air smelled of molten metal and ozone. She stood silently as he shaped new wonders, chains delicate as breath, armor that caught light and sang when struck. "You no longer need Olympus," she said. Hephaestus did not look up. "Perhaps not. But Olympus still needs me." She smiled faintly. "And me?" He paused, the hammer still in midair. "You taught me how to endure what cannot be changed. That is all a creator ever needs." When she left, Hera felt lighter than she had in centuries. The sound of his forge no longer haunted her, it soothed her. Every strike was proof that imperfection, once embraced, becomes strength. That night, as stars shimmered over Olympus, Hera walked through her temple gardens. The air smelled of myrrh and rain. The peacock trailed behind her, its feathers glinting with the forge's reflection. She looked toward the horizon, where Hephaestus's fires burned faintly through the mist. "He was my failure," she whispered, "and he became my masterpiece." The wind answered softly, as if in agreement. Below, mortals began to craft their own forges, copying the gods' art. Sparks lit the earth, and in every flame Hera saw echoes of her son's lesson, that creation, not perfection, defines the divine. Zeus joined her quietly. "He honors you," he said. Hera nodded. "As I honor what he became." For once, Zeus smiled without arrogance. "Perhaps we have both learned that the gods we make are often better than the gods we are." Hera looked at him, eyes bright. "Then let us keep creating." Lightning flickered gently across the clouds, not in wrath, but in blessing. And far below, in the mortal forges of men, hammers rang through the night, each one carrying a rhythm first born from a goddess's sorrow and a son's endurance. Even the heavens, it seemed, could be rebuilt, one strike at a time. The forge of Hephaestus had barely cooled when the next story began, one that would test Hera's understanding of justice more than any wound of love ever could. It began not with passion, nor betrayal, but with fire. Long before mortals learned to tame it, fire belonged to the gods alone. It was the breath of creation, light that gave form to chaos, warmth that separated life from death. Zeus, fearing mortal arrogance, forbade it to be shared with humankind. "Let them worship in darkness," he declared, "for light is the privilege of Olympus." But one among the Titans defied that decree, Prometheus. He was not a god of war or tempest, but of foresight, the one who saw what others ignored. He loved mortals not as subjects, but as fragile sparks worth guarding. And so, one night, he climbed to the heavens, stole flame from the chariot of the sun, and carried it down in a hollow reed. When the first mortal hands lit that sacred fire, the world changed forever. Zeus's wrath was immediate. Thunder split the sky, storms tore across the land. "For this theft," he roared, "Prometheus shall learn the price of defiance." But Hera, who once believed in punishment as order, hesitated. From her throne she watched the Titan bound in chains upon a desolate mountain, iron links forged by Hephaestus himself, burning hot enough to sear divine flesh. Each day, an eagle descended to feast upon his liver, and each night, it grew back, only for the torment to begin again. It should have pleased her. Justice served. Law restored. Yet as Hera gazed upon him from the clouds, she saw something disturbingly familiar in his suffering. Prometheus did not cry out. His silence was not surrender, but defiance refined into endurance, the same stillness Hera herself had mastered long ago. Zeus visited her that night, proud of his sentence. "Let him serve as reminder," he said. "Even Titans must learn obedience." Hera's tone was calm. "And what of compassion? Does it no longer dwell in heaven?" "Compassion?" Zeus laughed. "For a thief? For one who gave light to those who stumble in darkness," she answered quietly. Zeus turned to her, thunder flickering in his eyes. "Do not mistake rebellion for virtue. And do not mistake tyranny for law," she countered. The room fell silent, the same silence that always followed when husband and wife became opposites in truth. After he left, Hera walked to her balcony. The night sky flickered with mortal fires, glowing faintly across the earth. Each flame was a prayer to survival, a hymn to defiance. The sight stirred her heart in ways she could not name. For Hera understood now what Zeus did not: control cannot last forever. Every decree becomes dust, every chain eventually rusts. What endures is the will to resist, the will that gives creation meaning. Days turned to years. The story of Prometheus spread among mortals like the fire he had stolen. They spoke of his suffering, but also of his gift. Some worshipped him. Others pitied him. All admired him. And Hera, the goddess once feared as cruel, began to feel something unexpected: respect. She visited the mountain once, cloaked in storm. Prometheus looked up through his agony and smiled faintly. "So," he said, voice rough as stone, "the queen of Olympus comes to watch the thief burn." Hera stepped closer. "You mistake me. I come to understand." "Then learn this," Prometheus said, his eyes like embers. "There is no crime in compassion, only cost." His words pierced her deeper than any accusation. "Why suffer for them?" she asked. "Mortals forget their blessings as quickly as they speak them." "Because gods forget faster," he answered. Hera stood in silence, watching as the eagle swooped once more. It struck, and Prometheus convulsed, yet even in pain, he did not break. "Tell your husband," he gasped, "that he cannot chain the dawn." Hera turned away, the wind howling around her. When she returned to Olympus, her eyes were no longer cold. Something in her had shifted, a truth she could not unsee. She confronted Zeus one final time. "You bound him," she said. "But every mortal who lights a fire now carries his rebellion. Will you strike them all?" Zeus glared. "I rule them through fear." "No," Hera replied. "You only remind them that even fear can burn." That night, as the fires of mortal hearths flickered across the earth, Hera found herself standing beside Hephaestus's forge. The heat licked at her skin, not with pain but memory. "Mother," said Hephaestus, looking up from his anvil, "you are troubled." She nodded. "I have seen a god in chains who is freer than the king of heaven." Hephaestus smiled faintly. "Chains can teach, if they do not destroy. You taught me that." Hera's eyes glimmered. "Then perhaps it is time the world learned mercy from its queen." The next morning, the eagle did not come. The wind carried no cries from the mountain. Hera never confessed what she had done, but some say the chains of Prometheus began to rust that very day. Mortals would later say the queen of the gods had no heart. Yet every flame they lit afterward, every hearth, every lamp, every candle, was her quiet defiance of that lie. For the queen who once enforced law now understood its price, that order without compassion is its own form of darkness. And so, while Zeus ruled with thunder, Hera ruled with memory. Her justice became not punishment, but balance, the delicate art of knowing when to release what you once bound. Above her, the stars flickered like coals. Below, mortal fires glowed against the night. Between them, the queen of Olympus stood, no longer a symbol of wrath, but the silent guardian of light itself. For even gods must choose, to rule by fear, or to illuminate what they cannot control. The forge of Hephaestus glowed dimly below Olympus, but in Hera's halls, another kind of fire began to stir, one not of creation, but of inheritance. From compassion and wisdom would come another lesson, one written in blood rather than flame. For even gods, when they learn mercy, soon face the test of what mercy costs. Ares was born on a day of thunder. The sky was restless, heavy with the scent of rain, as though Olympus itself knew a new storm was entering the world. Hera bore him alone, without midwives, without witnesses. She had loved Zeus once, and later defied him, but this child, she swore, would belong to her entirely. When she first held him, he was silent. No cry, no laughter, only the faint tremor of air around him. Then, as lightning split the heavens, the infant opened his eyes, and in them burned a reflection of both parents, the precision of Hera's judgment, the chaos of Zeus's storm. He did not smile. He clenched his tiny fists, and the earth trembled. From the moment of his birth, Ares embodied contradiction, divine rage given flesh, born not from love, but from principle. To mortals, he would later become the god of war, the roar in the hearts of soldiers, the madness that drives men to strike their brothers. But to Hera, he was something deeper, the living proof that even justice can give birth to destruction if held too tightly. She raised him in her own image, disciplined, proud, unbending. Under her gaze, he learned that honor was not chaos, but order enforced through strength. He listened well, yet his blood boiled for motion. He would wrestle with the winds, strike the marble columns of Olympus just to hear them crack, and when rain fell, he laughed as if the storm were his companion. Zeus watched from afar, uneasy. "He bears too much of you," he said to Hera one night. "And not enough of you," she replied. "He is loyal." Zeus frowned. "Loyalty without restraint becomes tyranny." "Then perhaps," Hera said, "he is the child Olympus deserves." Years passed, and Ares grew into his name. When he walked, the air shimmered with heat. When he spoke, even Apollo fell silent. He carried not a crown but a sword, yet every movement was art, deliberate, perfect, terrifying. The first war among mortals began as all wars do, with pride disguised as justice. Two kings quarreled over land, each claiming divine right. Ares descended unseen, drawn by instinct. He did not cause the war, he revealed it. The men had already chosen blood, he merely showed them what blood truly meant. When the first spear struck flesh, Ares felt exhilaration. Not joy, that was for mortals, but clarity. For in battle, there was no deceit, no hypocrisy, no pretense of peace. There was only truth, the raw essence of choice stripped of consequence. He watched men cry out to the gods, their prayers dissolving into screams, and he smiled. From Olympus, Hera watched with mixed pride and dread. She saw her son, glorious and dreadful, shaping the destiny of mortals with each swing of his blade. "He is my justice," she murmured. "Unforgiving, pure." But Athena, wise and ever calm, stood beside her. "He is your mirror," she said. And mirrors, when shattered, cut deeply. Ares's reputation spread faster than the wind. Soldiers painted his sigil on their shields, kings called upon him for strength. But where Ares walked, peace fled. He began to crave the roar of battle the way mortals crave breath. Each victory left him hungrier, not stronger. When he returned to Olympus, his armor was stained with mortal blood. He knelt before Hera, pride gleaming in his eyes. "Mother," he said, "they worship me. They fear me. They understand what power is." Hera approached him, placing a hand upon his cheek. "They do not worship you," she said softly. "They worship their own violence through you. You are not their god, you are their excuse." He pulled away, anger flashing like a drawn blade. "You taught me to seek order." "I taught you to protect it," she replied. "Not to drown the world in its name." Ares turned toward the throne room, where Zeus listened silently. "You pity them," the war god said. "But pity does not win empires." "No," Zeus answered, his voice a low rumble, "but it keeps empires from consuming themselves." Ares laughed, the sound harsh and beautiful. "Then let them consume. The strong must rule, the weak must learn." He stormed away, his footsteps leaving scorch marks upon the marble floor. Hera watched him vanish into the clouds, her heart heavy. She had created him in strength, yet strength without empathy was destruction. That night, Hera stood alone beneath the open sky. The stars burned cold and distant, uncaring of mortal wars or divine regret. The peacock perched beside her, feathers rustling in the breeze. "He is my legacy," she whispered. "And my warning." Below, the fires of battle glowed across the earth, each one a heartbeat of her son's dominion. For every temple built in Hera's name, another was raised for Ares, blood for vows, flame for law. In the quiet between thunder and dawn, Hera finally understood what her son represented, not chaos, but consequence. Every act of divine justice, every punishment, every chain she had forged in her quest for order, all of it had led to him. Ares was not her creation alone. He was her reflection sharpened into fury. And so, when Zeus next looked upon her with that knowing gaze, the gaze that saw through every storm, she did not speak of motherhood or regret. She simply said, even the gods must face the children of their choices. For somewhere in the mortal world, the drums of war thundered like a heartbeat, the sound of humanity learning from the gods exactly what it meant to be divine. But can a world built on the lessons of its gods ever escape repeating them? In Olympus, beauty can be a weapon sharper than any blade. No one wielded it more effortlessly than Aphrodite, born of sea foam and longing, the embodiment of allure, love, and temptation. Her laughter softened storms, her presence unmade logic itself. Where she walked, hearts followed. To most gods, she was adored. To Hera, she was an open wound. After all the wars, betrayals, and lessons in restraint, Hera had learned to command respect through justice. But respect was slow to earn, while beauty conquered instantly. Mortals worshipped Hera out of fear and reverence, but they loved Aphrodite. They built altars of flowers for her, not laws. Songs for her, not oaths. And though Hera never envied flesh, she envied what flesh could summon. One evening, as the sun bled across Olympus in gold and rose, Hera watched Aphrodite from afar, the goddess surrounded by laughter, draped in mortal praise. Her every movement shimmered like water under sunlight. Even Zeus smiled in her direction. Hera's hand tightened around her scepter. She makes mockery of vows, she murmured. Love without order is chaos. Athena, ever the voice of reason, stood beside her. And yet, she said, chaos creates songs that justice cannot. Songs fade, Hera replied. Order endures. But even she knew her words rang hollow. Later that night, during a feast of the gods, the two goddesses finally faced each other. The air between them glowed with quiet tension, silk and steel. Aphrodite approached with a smile, her beauty almost unbearable. Queen Hera, she said sweetly, I hear the mortals are building another temple in your honor. Such devotion warms even my heart. Hera's lips curved. And I hear the same mortals tear their families apart in your name. Such love must be exhausting. Aphrodite laughed, a sound like music played on glass. What is marriage without desire? What is desire without loyalty? Hera countered. Zeus, seated between them, sensed the gathering storm and raised a cup. Let Olympus drink to both, to love and to law. But the toast did little to ease the tension. Hera's eyes lingered on Aphrodite throughout the night, not with hatred, but fascination. The goddess of love lived freely, without shame, without boundaries. Hera wondered, not for the first time, what it might feel like to be adored without fear. In the mortal world below, their rivalry echoed. Temples to Hera rose beside shrines to Aphrodite, each promising mortals opposite dreams, devotion or desire, peace or passion. Lovers prayed to both, uncertain which goddess would answer. Hera began to visit these temples in secret, cloaked in mortal form. She listened to women praying for faithful husbands, men begging for forgiveness after straying. She saw the same pain reflected in every tear, love's beauty twisted by deceit. One evening, she came upon a statue of Aphrodite, carved from marble so lifelike it seemed to breathe. The mortal sculptor had captured every curve, every softness. Hera stared for a long time, her jaw tightening. You make them chase illusions, she whispered. From the shadows, a familiar voice replied, illusion is often the only truth they can bear. Aphrodite stepped into the moonlight, her expression unreadable. She had followed Hera, curious. You judge me, she said gently, yet you and I are sisters in cause. You bind hearts through vows, I bind them through longing. We both rule over what breaks them. Hera's gaze was hard. You rule through weakness. Through honesty, Aphrodite corrected. They pretend love is noble, I remind them it is hunger. Hera took a step closer. And when that hunger destroys them? Aphrodite smiled sadly. Then you punish them. We are balance, you and I. I make the fire, you hold the ash. The words lingered in Hera's mind long after Aphrodite vanished into starlight. She wanted to deny them, but could not. For the first time, she realized the truth of her rival's domain: beauty and love were not enemies of order. They were its reason for existing. Without them, law would be empty, a cage without song. Days later, Hera stood before her mirror, gazing at her reflection. Once, it had shown her perfection, the unyielding queen, untouched by age or imperfection. Now, she saw the faintest trace of fatigue around her divine eyes, not physical, but emotional. Eternity wears even gods thin. The peacock, her faithful companion, rustled its feathers behind her. Its thousand-jeweled eyes shimmered like tiny mirrors. Hera smiled faintly. "Even beauty must fade," she said. "But perhaps that is what makes it holy." When she next saw Aphrodite at the riverbank of Olympus, she did not turn away. The goddess of love smiled at her in quiet recognition. No words were exchanged, none were needed. From that day forward, Hera ceased waging silent wars against beauty. Instead, she learned from it. In her temples, she added prayers not just for fidelity, but for tenderness. She began to understand that control without compassion is tyranny, and devotion without affection is hollow. Zeus noticed the change before anyone else. "You are gentler," he said one evening. "Have you grown tired of storms?" Hera looked toward the horizon, where mortals lit lamps at dusk. "No," she said softly. "I have simply learned that light, even when borrowed, still illuminates." He smiled faintly. "Then perhaps even the Queen of Heaven can love what she does not command." She met his gaze. "Perhaps love cannot be commanded at all." That night, the stars over Olympus burned brighter, as if heaven itself had drawn closer to the heart it once feared. And somewhere in the mortal world, a young woman lit 2 candles, one for Hera, one for Aphrodite, praying not for power, nor passion, but for balance. In that prayer, both goddesses were finally understood. For in every heart, order and desire are not enemies, they are reflections, one shimmering within the other. Mortals have always been mirrors for the gods, fragile, foolish reflections of their eternal dramas. Hera had seen it countless times, kings rising and falling, lovers breaking vows under the same stars that bore witness to Olympus. But one mortal queen would draw Hera's gaze more than any other, for in her story the goddess saw her own reflection, distorted, tragic, and true. Her name was Sidip, queen of a small island kingdom blessed by calm seas and abundant harvests. She ruled beside a husband who once worshipped her as divine, and in her youth, Sidip prayed daily at Hera's altar. "Bless my marriage," she would whisper, "and let loyalty be our crown." Hera answered, as she always did, to those who spoke her name with sincerity. For years, the queen's life was peaceful. Her people adored her, her husband honored her, and her halls rang with laughter. But time, the cruelest servant of the gods, erodes all vows eventually. When the first betrayal came, it was quiet. The king's glances wandered, his prayers grew short. Hera saw it all from Olympus, the small cracks forming in yet another mortal promise. She watched, waiting, wondering if this queen would follow the pattern of the rest: denial, anger, despair. But Sidip did not rage. She went instead to Hera's temple, knelt before the statue of the goddess, and whispered through her tears, "If he is false, then teach me strength, not vengeance." The prayer startled Hera. It was not a plea for punishment or retribution, only endurance. The same endurance Hera herself had once begged from the silent cosmos. Intrigued, the goddess descended in mortal guise, an old woman cloaked in green and gold. She found Sidip alone in the temple, her crown set aside, her eyes red but unbroken. Hera approached quietly. "Child," she said, voice soft as rain on marble, "why weep for what you cannot control?" Sidip looked up. "Because vows are not chains," she replied. "They are choices. And I cannot bear that mine was one-sided." Hera studied her. This mortal, unlike so many others, did not ask for miracles. She asked only to understand. Then learn this, Hera said, loyalty is not proven by the faithfulness of others, but by your endurance in their absence. The queen frowned. And what of justice? Justice, the goddess murmured, is rarely merciful. But mercy, when chosen, is the highest form of justice. Sidip bowed her head, her hands trembling. Then grant me mercy, Lady of Vows. Hera placed a hand upon her shoulder. I will grant you choice. When the goddess vanished, the queen awoke to find her heart changed, not hardened, but sharpened. She confronted her husband not with fury, but with truth. You have broken faith, she said. But I will not. I remain your queen, though I no longer love you as I once did. The king, shamed by her dignity, returned to loyalty for a time. Yet mortals are creatures of weakness. He faltered again, and again. Hera watched each fall, her divine patience tested. Finally, the goddess appeared to the king in a dream, radiant and terrible. You break what even the gods revere, she said. Shall I show you what it means to live faithless? The king awoke to find his reflection gone from every mirror, every pool of water. No matter where he looked, he could not see himself, as if the world had grown tired of acknowledging him. The punishment was subtle, poetic, cruel. He begged Sidip's forgiveness, but the queen, remembering Hera's words, simply said, You will be seen again when you learn to see me. Years passed. The king changed, slowly, painfully. He rebuilt his faith, his honesty, his love. And one morning, when he looked into the temple's fountain, his reflection returned, not the face of the man he had been, but of one humbled by loss. Sidip aged with grace, her kingdom prosperous. Hera's blessing remained over her house, not as favor, but as quiet respect. The goddess watched from above, her own reflection flickering in the temple's flames. When at last Sidip's time came, Hera herself descended to guide her soul. The queen's spirit rose like mist, gentle and shining. You kept your vows, Hera said. I kept myself, the queen replied. And that was the vow that mattered most. For a long moment, Hera stood in silence, her divine composure softening. You have taught even me, mortal queen, she said. That love does not fail, only the courage to protect it does. Sidip smiled faintly. Then guard your own heart, goddess. Even eternity can forget its promises. And with that, her spirit faded into the starlit air. When Hera returned to Olympus, her peacock followed, its feathers glimmering like 100 memories. She looked down at the mortal realm, where new queens ruled, new vows were sworn, and new betrayals took root. Yet something had changed. From that day onward, Hera blessed not only marriages but the strength to leave what dishonored them. In her temples, mortals began to pray not just for love, but for dignity. The goddess who once punished betrayal now protected those who survived it. Zeus noticed, of course. You grow gentler, he said one evening. The Queen of Heaven now comforts mortals she once cursed. Hera looked toward the horizon. Even gods must evolve, or we become our own myths. He smiled faintly. And what have you learned from your mortal queen? That loyalty, Hera said, is not the chain that binds, it is the courage to walk away without hatred. Zeus nodded slowly, his eyes thoughtful. Perhaps, he said, mortals are not as small as we think. No, she replied, they are simply closer to truth. That night, Hera stood beneath the stars and whispered a quiet blessing into the wind, not a command, but a promise. To those who love and lose, she said, may you find peace not in perfection, but in perseverance. The wind carried her words down to the mortal world, where 1,000 lamps flickered in answer, vows renewed not by fear of gods, but by faith in themselves. For even the divine must learn this truth, love is not eternal because it never breaks, it is eternal because, when it does, we choose to rebuild. Olympus had known countless feasts, but none began with such perfect harmony, and ended with such poetic irony. The great hall shimmered with torches, ambrosia flowed like rivers of light, and the gods, for once, seemed at peace. Yet beneath the laughter and gold lay something unspoken, a lesson still unpaid. Hera had learned mercy, justice, restraint, but not yet forgiveness. And the teacher destined to deliver that final lesson was none other than her castaway son, Hephaestus. It began when the smith god returned from his forge in Lemnos, bearing a gift. "For my mother," he said, his face calm, unreadable. The gods crowded around as Hephaestus unveiled a golden throne unlike any ever seen. It gleamed like liquid sunlight, its carvings alive with motion, vines, stars, and feathers twisting and shimmering as if breathing. Hera's eyes softened. "You honor me," she said, unaware of the trap that waited beneath beauty. "I honor what made me," Hephaestus replied simply. "Sit, and it shall sing of your reign." The words were perfect, the tone reverent. No one, not even Zeus, suspected. Hera, moved by his humility, took her place upon the throne. But the instant she did, the air shimmered with invisible power. Chains of gold sprang from the armrests, wrapping around her wrists and ankles, delicate yet unbreakable. Gasps filled the hall. Hera's expression froze, not from pain, but from disbelief. "Hephaestus," she whispered, "what is this?" He stepped back, his eyes burning not with vengeance, but conviction. "A reflection," he said. "You once bound the thunder. You once cast down what was imperfect. Now you will learn what it means to be still, to depend on those you once deemed above reproach." The hall erupted in chaos. Aphrodite laughed softly. Ares reached for his sword, only to be stopped by Athena's hand. Zeus stood, lightning coiling around his fingers. "Release her, boy," he thundered. Hephaestus met his father's gaze without flinching. "Did she release me?" The question silenced the heavens. Even Zeus, master of storms, hesitated. Hera sat unmoving, her composure returning. "And if I command you?" she said, voice calm as marble. "Then I will disobey," he replied. "Because a command given in pride is no different than a chain." The word struck Hera like a mirror shattering. Around her, the gods whispered, half horrified, half awed. No one had ever spoken to the Queen of Olympus that way. For hours, Hephaestus let her sit bound to the throne. It did not harm her, it humbled her. The weight was not physical, but symbolic, a reminder that even divinity could be restrained by its own unacknowledged cruelty. At first, Hera was furious. "You mistake arrogance for justice," she said. "This is vengeance disguised as wisdom." But Hephaestus only answered, "No. This is balance." Zeus, torn between outrage and fascination, called to Dionysus, the god of persuasion. "Bring him back to reason," he said. "Or bring me wine enough to forget I ever fathered him." Dionysus descended to the forge, where Hephaestus had returned, hammering in silence. The god of revelry poured wine and spoke in riddles. "Chains are only heavy when you stop dancing," he said. Hephaestus smiled. "Then teach me your steps." Hours later, the two gods returned together, laughter and wine spilling before them. "Mother," Hephaestus said, "have you learned the lesson I forged for you?" Hera met his gaze, and for the first time in eons, her eyes softened completely. "Perhaps," she said. "Perhaps mercy is not only giving forgiveness, but asking for it." He raised his hand. The throne shimmered, the golden chains dissolving into dust. Hera stood, unbound, her dignity intact, but her pride forever changed. The hall erupted into applause. The gods cheered, not for victory, but for understanding. Hera approached her son slowly, her voice trembling with something almost human. "You have your mother's pride," she said, "and your own strength. Both have burned you. Yet you forged light from both. For that, I am proud." Hephaestus bowed. "You cast me down so I could learn to rise. It was cruel. But it was necessary." Zeus, watching, lifted his goblet. Then let Olympus drink to irony, the only truth that ever humbles gods. Laughter returned to the hall. The tension dissolved. Yet beneath the revelry, Hera's thoughts lingered on her son's words. Balance. She looked around at the immortal faces, at the endless cycle of love and betrayal, wrath and forgiveness. Perhaps Olympus itself was the golden throne, a trap of beauty, binding them all in a lesson they could never finish learning. That night, when the others had gone, Hera remained alone. The throne gleamed faintly under the moonlight, its magic quiet now. She reached out and touched the gold. For the first time, she did not see power or perfection. She saw herself, flawed, radiant, enduring. Her peacock rustled beside her. "We are all bound," she whispered, "by what we've made, until we choose to release it." From far below, the sound of Hephaestus's hammer echoed through the mountains, steady as a heartbeat. It no longer haunted her. It comforted her. Each strike said what words never could, that forgiveness, once forged, is stronger than gold. When Zeus joined her, he said nothing. He simply stood beside her, his hand resting lightly on hers. For once, there was no storm between them, only the faint glow of something fragile, and therefore sacred. And in that quiet, Hera finally smiled. For even gods, it seems, must be trapped before they can truly be free. The night after the golden throne was broken, Olympus slept, or seemed to. Its clouds drifted softer, its marble shone dimly in the moonlight, and for the first time in an age, there was quiet between thunder and dawn. But Hera did not sleep. Gods do not dream as mortals do, yet even they, on rare occasions, wander through visions born of their own unrest. That night, Hera dreamt of peace. It began with silence. Not the heavy silence of restraint, but the soft, breathing calm of a world healed. She stood in a meadow that stretched to the horizon, filled with flowers that shimmered like molten gold. The air was warm, unscarred by storms. No prayers rose to her. No cries for vengeance, no pleas for fidelity. Only harmony. In the distance stood a figure, tall, radiant, familiar. Zeus, but younger, gentler, eyes unburdened by centuries of guilt. He smiled at her, the way he once had before thrones and crowns turned their affection into a contest. "We did it," he said softly. "The world is balanced. The mortals love without fear. The gods rule without pride." Hera felt her heart ease. Is it truly possible? He stepped closer, took her hand. "It is already done." And for a while, she believed him. She saw her children laughing together, Ares without rage, Hephaestus without pain, Hebe dancing through sunlight. Aphrodite walked beside her, unthreatening and kind. Even Athena smiled. The wars of mortals had ended, temples stood not in rivalry, but in gratitude. Everywhere, light. Everywhere, peace. It was a vision so beautiful it frightened her. For Hera, who had spent eternity defending order, knew too well that perfection demands something in return. And as she turned her gaze skyward, she saw it, the stars no longer moved. The rivers did not flow. The wind held its breath. Creation, in its flawless stillness, had ceased to live. The dream began to unravel. Zeus's hand slipped from hers. His eyes dimmed. The meadows wilted, the gold bled away. Voices, countless, desperate, rose from the earth. "Hera," they cried, "the world without pain is a world without choice." She turned, and the illusion shattered. The sky cracked open, spilling thunder and flame. The gods she loved, the ones she had guided, punished, and forgiven, turned to smoke, their perfection collapsing under its own weight. In the center of the chaos stood a mirror. Hera approached, trembling. Within it, she saw herself, but not the regal queen of Olympus. Instead, she saw a woman, alone, weary, her crown tarnished. And around her reflection, faint and ghostly, burned every vow she had ever made. You cannot have both, the reflection whispered. Order and freedom. Perfection and life. One must yield. Hera's voice cracked. Then what is my purpose? The mirror smiled, her smile, but older. To hold the balance, knowing it will always slip from your hands. To guard what can never be kept. The meadow returned for an instant, not perfect this time, but alive. The flowers swayed unevenly. The wind roared. Lightning struck, then faded. Imperfection, moving, breathing. And in that fragile imperfection, Hera saw beauty again. When she awoke, the first light of dawn spilled across Olympus. The air was crisp, the clouds tinted in amber. Hera rose from her bed and walked to her balcony. Below, the mortal world stirred, farmers lighting fires, mothers calling children, kings whispering prayers to unseen gods. She felt no need to answer them immediately. Let them live, she thought. Let them make their mistakes. For what was the point of gods if mortals were not allowed to stumble? Zeus appeared beside her, the quiet gentleness of morning softening even his thunderous presence. You did not sleep well, he said. I dreamt, she replied. He raised an eyebrow. Of what? Perfection, she said. And how it kills. He studied her for a long moment, then smiled faintly. You've always feared chaos more than me. Not anymore, she whispered. Chaos means the world is still alive. They stood together in silence, watching the sunrise. Below them, mortals quarreled and laughed, prayed and sinned, endlessly imperfect, endlessly striving. Hera's heart ached, but not with sorrow. With wonder. Later that day, she visited the great temple where the muses sang. Their hymns wove through the air, echoing with mortal longing and divine memory. Hera listened as they sang of her, not as the wrathful queen, nor the jealous wife, but as the guardian of vows, the protector of what endures. The melody was imperfect, the harmonies slightly off, and that, she realized, made it real. When the song ended, she whispered, "Keep singing." The muses bowed. Always, my queen. That night, Hera returned to her chambers. She looked upon her throne, golden, resplendent, silent, and chose not to sit upon it. Instead, she opened the balcony doors and let the wind rush in. The peacock fluttered to her shoulder, its feathers glowing faintly in the moonlight. Hera smiled, running a hand along its neck. Tell me, she murmured, if Olympus ever stops dreaming, will it still deserve to exist? The bird's jeweled eyes glimmered in answer, 1,000 tiny reflections of the world below. Hera looked out one last time, her voice barely a whisper. Let them dream. Let them err. For only in imperfection can love survive. The clouds drifted apart, revealing a night sky alive with movement, stars shifting, flickering, falling, proof that even eternity changes. And as Hera closed her eyes, she did not dream of order again. She dreamed of life, flawed, vibrant, and free. For what greater power can a goddess wield than to let the world be what it must become? The air of Olympus was calm again, but below the clouds, the world of mortals was stirring. Heroes were rising, shaped not by divine decree but by the echoes of divine mistakes. Among them was one whose story would test Hera's patience, not through defiance, but through silence. Perseus, the son of Zeus and the mortal princess Danae. From the moment of his birth, the pattern was familiar, Zeus's love descending upon the mortal world, a woman left with both a blessing and a curse, and Hera, watching, wearied, yet unable to look away. But something in her had changed. The fires of jealousy that once burned without restraint now flickered differently. When she learned of Perseus's birth, Hera did not send storms. She did not whisper madness into the winds or summon serpents to his cradle. She simply turned away. Let him live, she said to the clouds. Let him learn what kind of God his father truly is. For the first time in eternity, Hera chose indifference. Yet indifference, for one such as her, was never simple. As Perseus grew, stories of his bravery reached Olympus. He was unlike Heracles, gentle where the other had been wild, clever where the other had been relentless. When he set out to slay Medusa, even Athena aided him. The irony was not lost on Hera. Zeus's children always seemed to find champions among the gods, while their mother, the goddess of fidelity, was left to endure their consequences. Still, Hera watched him. She saw the boy face monsters born from divine cruelty, the Gorgons, cursed by Athena, the sea beasts, sent by Poseidon, the betrayals of kings who feared him. Perseus did not rage against the gods. He simply moved forward, mortal yet unshaken. When he lifted Medusa's severed head, Hera felt no pride, only pity. Another child forged by divine interference, she whispered. Another mortal carrying the weight of our lessons. One evening, as thunder rolled faintly over the sea, Hera stood at the edge of Olympus and looked down. She could see Perseus sailing home, the head of Medusa sealed within a bag of bronze. He had saved a kingdom, rescued a queen, and yet, his victories were quiet, his glory unclaimed. Zeus appeared beside her, his expression almost tender. "You do not despise this one," he said. "I no longer despise any," she replied. "But I remember." Zeus smiled faintly. "He is my son." "All the more reason I watch him," Hera said. The king of gods laughed, a sound that rolled like distant thunder. "You cannot help yourself, can you? Even when you forgive, you still guard." Hera looked toward the horizon, where lightning danced on the sea. "Guarding and forgiving are not the same. I guard because I remember what you forget." Below, Perseus faced his final trial, the monster sent to devour Andromeda, chained to the rocks of her father's sin. As Hera watched, she saw the waves rise like walls, the creatures roar shaking the cliffs. The mortal drew his sword, raised the cursed head, and in a flash of divine irony, turned the beast to stone. Hera felt something stir within her chest, a quiet respect. Not for the act itself, but for what it symbolized, a mortal wielding the curse of gods not for vengeance, but for salvation. "Perhaps," she murmured, "mortals understand us better than we understand ourselves." When Perseus married Andromeda and laid down his sword, Hera felt no wrath. She felt peace. His victories were not defiance, but balance, each one restoring what divine pride had broken. And when he built temples in honor of the gods, Hera's name was among them. For the first time in centuries, she was worshipped not out of fear, but gratitude. Years later, as Perseus grew old, he prayed not for power, but for rest. Hera listened to his words as they rose like smoke from his final pyre. "If the gods are just," he whispered, "may they remember mercy as much as law." She answered him not with thunder, but with silence, gentle, approving. When his soul reached the stars, Hera placed him among the constellations. Perseus, the hero, forever chasing the reflection of his own choices across the night sky. Zeus noticed and said nothing. He only watched as Hera's hand lingered in the air, tracing the pattern of her forgiveness among the stars. "You honored him," he said at last. "I honored what he became," she replied. "A mortal who proved that even the children of chaos can choose peace." Zeus studied her quietly. "Have you grown weary of punishing us all?" Hera smiled, a small, tired smile. "No. I've simply learned that punishment is easy. Understanding takes eternity." Below, the mortal world looked up at the new constellation, Perseus frozen in triumph, sword raised, forever victorious. None knew that the hand that placed him there belonged to the goddess they once feared most. Hera turned to the heavens, her voice barely above a whisper. "May you rest where I cannot." The peacock at her side rustled its feathers, and she stroked its jeweled crown. "He fought monsters," she said softly. "I have lived among them." Zeus looked at her, a trace of sorrow in his eyes. "Do you still see me among them?" Hera met his gaze. "No," she said after a pause. "But I see what we created together. And perhaps that is punishment enough." For a long moment, neither spoke. The wind whispered through the halls of Olympus, carrying the faint hum of mortal prayers. Somewhere below, a child looked up at the stars and whispered Perseus's name. Hera closed her eyes, listening. In his legend, she heard echoes of all her lessons: justice, vengeance, forgiveness, and the fragile beauty of imperfection. And in that quiet, Hera finally understood, divinity was not about ruling the world, but watching it grow beyond you. For the gods who learn to let go are the only ones who truly become eternal. The world had changed again. Centuries rolled like waves, and the mortal kingdoms that once whispered Hera's name in fear began to sing it in reverence. Across Greece, her temples rose like white crowns upon the earth, none grander than the one built upon the island of Samos, the Heraean. From Olympus, Hera watched its construction unfold. Thousands of hands carved her likeness into marble, serene, powerful, eternal. Pillars taller than any mortal had ever dared to build reached toward the sky, gilded with offerings of gold, ivory, and peacock feathers. When the temple was completed, its doors opened not with thunder, but with silence, the kind of silence that trembles with devotion. Mortals came from every city-state to worship. They offered grain, garlands, and the vows of the newly wedded. "May our union be blessed as yours," they prayed. The irony was not lost on the goddess who heard them. From her throne in the clouds, Hera smiled, but it was the sad smile of a teacher who knows her students have misunderstood the lesson. "Blessed as mine," she murmured. "Then may they also learn what blessing costs." Still, she could not deny the beauty of it. The Heraean stood not as a monument to wrath, but to endurance. Mortals no longer feared her storms, they revered her order. Within its walls, priests tended fires that never went out, symbolizing the eternal promise of union, not perfect, but persevering. One evening, Hera descended unseen, walking among her worshippers as an old woman in a violet cloak. The temple glowed with torchlight, and the sound of hymns swelled like the tide. She paused before her own statue, taller than any mortal roof, its eyes carved with calm authority. She studied it for a long time. "Is this what you see in me?" she whispered. "A face without flaw, a heart without doubt." The marble, of course, did not answer. But the priestess beside her did. "She sees all vows kept," the woman said softly, thinking Hera only another pilgrim. "And all promises broken. That is why we pray, not to escape judgment, but to be seen." Hera turned to her, struck by the quiet wisdom in the mortal's tone. "And what do you ask her for, child?" The priestess smiled faintly. "That she remember we are trying." Those words pierced Hera more deeply than any prayer of fear or flattery ever had. That she remember we are trying. Mortals no longer begged her to punish or to protect, they simply wished to be understood. When the priestess left, Hera lingered. She placed her hand upon the statue's foot, cold, unyielding stone, and felt the faintest tremor beneath it. The living heartbeat of belief. She understood then, temples were not prisons for gods, they were mirrors for humanity's hope. Each column, each hymn, each offering, all were reflections of mortal longing for meaning. For the first time, Hera felt not worshipped, but connected. Back on Olympus, Zeus joined her on the balcony overlooking the mortal world. "They have built you a kingdom," he said, nodding toward the glimmering Heraean below. "You are loved." "Am I?" she asked quietly. "Or are they loving an idea of me that never truly existed?" Zeus chuckled. "Does it matter? We are all ideas to them." Hera turned to him, her eyes sharp. "It matters to me. I want to be remembered as I am, not as perfection carved from marble, but as endurance shaped by imperfection." Zeus smiled faintly. "You are still the philosopher beneath the crown." "I am the crown," she replied. "But the weight grows lighter when you learn why it was given." Down below, the first festival of Heraean began, the Tanaya, where young maidens bathed her statue in the sea and crowned it with new garlands. They sang songs of loyalty and protection, laughter rising like incense into the night sky. Hera listened, eyes glistening with something that was not quite pride, not quite sorrow. They see me as their guardian, she said. They do not know that I envy them, their briefness, their courage to begin again despite endings. Zeus's voice softened. Mortals worship because they fear forgetting. We rule because we fear being forgotten. And yet, Hera whispered, it is they who will outlast us, in story, in song, in memory. As the festival continued, Hera's peacock descended from the heavens, circling the temple before vanishing into the stars. The worshippers gasped, falling to their knees in awe. They would tell their children the goddess herself had blessed them that night. Hera smiled. Let them believe it so. But in her heart, she knew the truth, the goddess of order no longer sought dominion. She sought understanding. And in that small shift, the immortal found something mortals had always known, that devotion is not about perfection, but presence. Later, as dawn approached, Hera stood upon the highest column of the Heraean, unseen by mortal eyes. The sea stretched endless before her, gold and violet under the rising sun. She raised her hand, and the winds bowed in silence. My shadow touches every stone, she said softly. But it is not fear that makes it sacred, it is memory. Behind her, the peacock spread its feathers, each jeweled eye glimmering with reflected dawn. For once, Hera did not command. She only watched. And below, as the temple bells rang, the mortals of Samos lifted their faces to the sky, whispering her name, not as a plea, but as gratitude. For when God ceased to demand devotion and began to inspire it, they stepped closer to eternity itself. The festivals of the Heraean had ended. The songs quieted, the garlands withered, and the sea winds carried away the incense of devotion. Yet Hera felt no rest. For centuries she had ruled, judged, forgiven, and evolved, but one question haunted her still. Was any of it truly her choice? Even gods are bound by the laws they enforce, and destiny, though unseen, tightens its grip upon them as surely as it does upon mortals. Hera began to wonder if her path, her anger, her mercy, even her love, had been written long before she ever spoke her first vow. It was this thought that led her to Delphi. The oracle's temple lay shrouded in mist, carved into the heart of the mountain. The air trembled with prophecy, every breath felt like an unspoken answer. Mortals came here to seek fate's whispers, but Hera came seeking silence, the one thing the future could never give her. She descended unseen, her divine light dimmed beneath a mortal cloak. The priests bowed to her unknowingly, their eyes dazed from the fumes that rose from the sacred chasm. The oracle sat upon her tripod, her gaze distant, her lips trembling with visions not yet born. When Hera approached, the air grew still. Even the vapors paused. The priestess's eyes snapped open, white and blind, yet somehow aware. You should not be here, Queen of Heaven, she said. The fates do not like to be questioned. I have ruled by their thread, Hera answered. I only ask if the thread can be cut. The oracle's voice deepened, as though speaking with more than one mouth. You seek freedom from the design that made you. I seek truth, Hera said. Is there any freedom for gods who live forever? The oracle's head tilted. Immortality is not freedom. It is memory without choice. Hera's heart tightened. Then are we nothing but echoes? The oracle smiled faintly, her expression almost kind. Echoes that learn to sing differently. For a long moment, Hera said nothing. The words lingered like smoke, comforting and cruel at once. If I cannot escape fate, she whispered, then let me understand it. The oracle's hand rose, trembling. Then listen, Queen of Heaven. You are not punished for pride, nor rewarded for patience. You are the balance itself, the law that keeps the chaos of creation from consuming the world. Even your doubts serve purpose. Hera frowned. And when the balance ends? The oracle's eyes glazed again, and her voice grew distant, echoing across time. When mortals forget your name, when temples crumble and prayers turn to silence, you will not vanish. You will become idea, then archetype, then memory. You will live in their justice, in their love, in their need to make order from pain. The word struck Hera like thunder beneath her skin. She had expected answers, not transcendence. Then even oblivion is purpose, she murmured. Even forgetting, the oracle said softly, is a form of remembering. For a moment, Hera saw it all, her temples falling to ruin, her statues broken, yet her essence living on in the hearts of mortals who no longer spoke her name. Judges, mothers, lovers, all carrying fragments of her within them. She felt sorrow, but also strange peace. Perhaps immortality was not remaining, but resonating. Then the vision shattered. The oracle gasped, collapsing. Hera caught her, lowering her gently to the marble floor. Enough, she whispered. You have given what I came for. The priestess's sightless eyes fluttered. Then remember, Queen of Heaven, even the gods are bound not by chains, but by meaning. Hera stood. Around her, the air shimmered with the fading pulse of prophecy. She looked up through the opening in the temple roof, the sunlight pouring down like judgment. Meaning, she repeated. Then let mine be mercy. As she ascended from Delphi, the wind carried whispers through the pines, faint voices of mortals praying, arguing, hoping. For the first time, she did not distinguish between them. Each voice, each fear, each love, all were part of the same endless music. When she returned to Olympus, Zeus awaited her. You went to Delphi, he said quietly. Hera nodded. I went to ask if gods have choices. He smiled sadly. And what did they tell you? That choice is not freedom, she said. It is responsibility. Zeus's expression softened. Then perhaps you understand now what I never did. I understand, Hera said, that eternity is not meant to be perfect. It is meant to teach. That night, Hera walked alone through the gardens of Olympus. The stars shimmered through the clouds like forgotten altars. She paused beside a pool of still water, gazing at her reflection. For the first time, she did not see the queen, the wife, or the goddess. She saw a being of contradictions, storm and calm, wrath and compassion, and she accepted all of it. The peacock perched beside her, its jeweled feathers reflecting starlight. So this is destiny, she whispered. To seek meaning, knowing it will never be complete. The bird tilted its head, as if agreeing. Hera smiled. Then let the search be eternal. And as she walked away, the reflection in the water lingered for a heartbeat longer than she did, serene, luminous, watching, as if the goddess had left a part of herself behind to keep wondering. For the gods who question fate are the ones who make it worth believing in. The season of calm that followed Hera's visit to Delphi was unlike any other. The air on Olympus shimmered with a rare stillness, not the silence of fear, but of expectancy. Something was shifting. Hera felt it every time she passed the marble halls, every time her eyes met those of the gods who once whispered behind her back. They did not know it yet, but change was coming. It began with an invitation. Zeus, in an unusual gesture of goodwill, decreed that a grand feast would be held, not to celebrate war, conquest, or even victory, but to honor harmony among the gods. A gathering without rivalry, he claimed, to prove Olympus can feast without thunder. The message reached every corner of heaven. Athena came draped in silver, Apollo with his golden lyre, Artemis with her quiet grace. Dionysus carried amphorae of wine so fragrant it made the air sweet. And at the center of it all, Hera sat beside her husband, her crown gleaming beneath the torches, calm, composed, unreadable. The mortals below would one day call it the Feast of Contradictions, for what began in peace would end in revelation. The first toast was gentle. Zeus raised his cup. To Olympus, he said, and to those who keep its balance, especially my queen. Hera inclined her head. The compliment, though public, carried sincerity. For the first time in centuries, his tone held no challenge. She sipped her wine without reply, the faintest smile touching her lips. The second toast came from Aphrodite. To love, she said, her voice liquid and soft, for without it, even justice loses its meaning. Hera met her gaze across the table, two forces forever intertwined, now tempered by time. Then may love learn loyalty, she replied. The hall laughed lightly, the tension dissolving into something almost kind. Dionysus raised his cup next. To contradiction, he declared. For without it, what would the gods be? We are all opposites pretending to make sense. The laughter grew louder. Even Athena smiled. Yet beneath the warmth, Hera felt the weight of the oracle's words echoing still, you are the balance. She watched her fellow gods, each a reflection of excess, wisdom turned pride, beauty turned vanity, war turned addiction. They were immortal contradictions, and she was their center. As the night deepened, the feast turned wild. Apollo played his lyre, and nymphs danced in spirals of light. Dionysus poured endless wine, Hermes slipped silver coins into pockets not his own. The laughter became thunderous. Only Hera remained still. Zeus noticed. You are quiet tonight, he said, leaning close. I am watching, she replied. What do you see? The same as always, she said. Desire pretending to be joy. Power pretending to be peace. He frowned. And what are you pretending to be? Hera looked at him, really looked, and for once, her eyes were not hard. Forgiven, she said. Zeus said nothing. The word hung between them like lightning before the strike. At the far end of the hall, Ares and Apollo began to argue, music against war, art against fury. Their voices rose, shattering the illusion of harmony. Athena intervened, her patience thin. Peace, she commanded. Peace is weakness, Ares growled. Then you have never known strength, Athena replied. Hera stood. Her voice, when it came, was not loud, but it carried through the hall like the echo of the first storm. Enough. Every god fell silent. She stepped forward, her presence filling the chamber. This is Olympus, not a stage for vanity. We claim to rule creation, yet we mirror its flaws more deeply than mortals ever could. Her gaze swept across them, from Aphrodite's uneasy smile to Ares's clenched fists. We are contradictions, every one of us. But balance is not born of perfection, it is born of recognition. She turned to Zeus. Even you, my king, are not the storm, only its echo. You bring life and destruction with the same hand. And I, she paused. I am no better. I have called vengeance justice, and pride devotion. I have punished love because I feared losing it. A hush fell so complete that even the torches seemed to hold their breath. Hera's crown caught the firelight, scattering gold across her face. But tonight, she said, I choose neither pride nor fear. I choose understanding. She raised her cup. To contradiction. To imperfection. To the gods who must learn, as mortals do, that divinity is not power, it is responsibility. For a moment, no one moved. Then Athena rose and lifted her own cup. To the queen, she said, who dares to speak what even wisdom avoids. Zeus stood next, the faintest smile tugging at his lips. To Hera, he said. Who has finally learned that control is not strength, and taught the rest of us the same. One by one, the gods joined. The hall filled with the clinking of goblets and the hum of voices, soft, reverent, new. Later, when the music returned and laughter echoed once more, Hera stepped away from the table. She walked to the balcony, where moonlight spilled like silver water. From there, she could see the mortal fires below, each one flickering with imperfect beauty. Aphrodite joined her quietly. You've changed, she said. Hera smiled faintly. No. I've remembered. Remembered what? That even gods must kneel to truth. Aphrodite's laughter was soft. And what truth is that? Hera looked up at the stars, countless, uneven, alive. That the world is not meant to be ruled, she said. Only understood. The goddess of love nodded, her reflection shimmering beside Hera's in the starlight. Then perhaps we're finally on the same side. Perhaps, Hera replied. Or perhaps we always were, and simply forgot. Below them, the winds shifted. The fires of Olympus flickered gently, and for the first time in memory, no god spoke, no thunder rolled. There was only balance, fragile, fleeting, beautiful. Hera closed her eyes, letting the silence wash through her. For once, she felt not divine, but alive. And in that moment, the Queen of Heaven became something far greater, the goddess who learned to be human. Centuries passed. Empires rose and fell like tides, and the marble temples of Hera slowly gave way to dust. The statues that once gleamed in her honor cracked under moss and time. Yet still, the goddess remained, not as thunder or flame, but as an idea, soft as the echo of a hymn half remembered. In the age of reflection, mortals began to look inward for divinity. The philosophers of Greece no longer prayed to the heavens for answers, they debated them under open skies. Plato spoke of ideal forms, Aristotle of purpose and order, their words unconsciously tracing the pattern Hera had always embodied. Balance. Structure. Endurance. Her temples stood silent, but her essence breathed through human thought. The laws of city-states mirrored her will, vows, marriage rites, justice systems, all carried her unseen hand. On Olympus, Hera watched this transformation not with sorrow, but with wonder. They have taken our names, she said softly, and turned them into meanings. Zeus stood beside her, older now in spirit though ageless in form. And is that not immortality, he asked. Perhaps, she said, but it is a lonely one. He smiled faintly. We were always meant to fade, not vanish. They no longer need us to command them, only to remind them. Hera looked down upon Athens, where philosophers gathered near the Parthenon, their words filling the air with thought instead of prayer. She could hear them discussing the balance between chaos and order, love and law, the very essence of her existence reborn in human speech. It seems, she murmured, they have learned to think like gods. And we, Zeus replied, must learn to watch like mortals. Far below, a sculptor worked in silence. His chisel struck marble, shaping not a goddess this time, but a woman, regal yet imperfect, serene yet sorrowful. When finished, he named her the Enduring One. He did not know it, but his hands had remembered Hera's face. Each strike of the chisel was an act of devotion, not worship. The mortal world no longer feared her wrath, but still felt her presence in every vow whispered, every promise kept. As night fell, Hera walked unseen among mortals. She passed through markets and gardens, temples and ruins. No one recognized her, yet they spoke her name without knowing it, in their laws, their loyalty, their longing for something greater than themselves. She lingered at a wedding in a small village by the sea. The bride trembled as she recited her vows, the groom's hands shook as he placed the ring. Hera felt their sincerity like a spark of the divine, fragile, fleeting, but pure. When the vows were done, a breeze stirred through the olive trees, and petals fell like blessings. The couple smiled at the wind, believing it good fortune. Hera smiled too. Still they remember, she whispered. Elsewhere, philosophers argued by torchlight. One claimed love was madness, another said it was the highest virtue. Hera listened, unseen, as their debate carried into the night. She did not intervene. Once, she might have demanded reverence. Now, she simply admired their curiosity. For the first time, she felt peace not from control, but from release. On Olympus, Athena approached her. You walk among them often now, she said. Do you not tire of being unseen? Hera looked out at the world below. To be unseen, she said, is not to be forgotten. Every idea that carries truth is a reflection of us. The form fades, the essence remains. Athena nodded thoughtfully. Then perhaps wisdom and endurance are sisters after all. Perhaps, Hera replied. Though I suspect endurance is the elder. They both smiled. As centuries turned to millennia, Hera's presence transformed again. In Rome, she became Juno, guardian of the state, protector of women. In Byzantium, she lived on in icons of the Virgin, not divine by name, but by nature. Every civilization reshaped her into something it needed, a symbol of law, motherhood, sovereignty. And still, she endured. Her name changed, her stories fractured, yet her essence never left the human heart. She was there in every promise made beneath the stars, every act of forgiveness between lovers, every law that bound chaos into order. One evening, as the last golden light of the sun brushed against the ruins of her Heraeon, Hera descended one final time. The pillars were broken, the marble darkened with moss. But the air still held the faint hum of worship long faded. She walked among the stones, her hand brushing the carvings worn smooth by centuries. It is not the temple that keeps us alive, she said softly. It is what they learned within it. From the shadows, her peacock emerged, old, weary, but beautiful still. Its feathers glimmered faintly under the dying sun, each eye reflecting not divinity, but memory. Come, Hera whispered. Our age of thunder has ended. The age of thought begins. As she turned to leave, she glanced back once more at the ruins. The light struck the broken altar just so, and for a brief, breathtaking moment, her statue seemed to breathe again. The eyes that time had hollowed filled once more with golden fire, not of vengeance, but of quiet endurance. And then it faded, leaving only stone. But the mortals who passed by days later swore they felt warmth there, as though the goddess herself had walked through the ruins and smiled. For when gods become memory, and memory becomes wisdom, their reign is not over. It has only evolved. Time is the one force even the gods must bow to. Not because it destroys them, but because it redefines them. By the dawn of the Roman world, Hera's name had changed. The Greeks whispered her as myth, the Romans proclaimed her anew as Juno, goddess of empire, queen of statehood, protector of marriage and motherhood. The transformation was not a death, it was a rebirth through language, through culture, through memory itself. Hera watched from above as mortals renamed her, reshaped her, worshipped her under a different light. Her statues now bore Roman robes instead of Greek drapery, her temples echoed with Latin hymns. Her peacocks adorned mosaics beside eagles, symbols of sovereignty and law. She should have felt honored. Yet the change brought with it a strange ache, a hollow recognition that every era loves its gods differently. Juno, they called her. Queen of Heaven. Guardian of Rome. The word sounded familiar, and yet distant, like hearing her own reflection speak back in another voice. One morning, she descended to the city that now bore her name. The temple of Juno Moneta stood atop the Capitoline hill, gleaming in the Roman sun. Gold-lined columns reached for the sky, priests moved in solemn rhythm, burning offerings of incense and grain. The air smelled of empire, order and ambition wrapped in devotion. From the shadows, Hera, Juno, watched the rituals unfold. The prayers were beautiful, precise, rehearsed. The words struck the air like polished marble. But something was missing. They no longer prayed for love or forgiveness. They prayed for victory, for wealth, for dominion. The Queen of Heaven had become the emblem of empire. As the priests chanted, a young girl among them hesitated. She was small, no more than 16, holding a basket of doves meant for sacrifice. Her hands trembled. When she reached the altar, one of the doves fluttered from her grasp, perching on a nearby statue. The priest scolded her, raising his hand. Before he could strike, the wind shifted. A voice, soft, commanding, filled the air. Let it fly. The temple fell silent. The girl froze. The priest's eyes widened. Who speaks? The torches flickered, their flames bending toward the goddess's statue. For a moment, the carved stone face seemed alive, the faintest smile touching its lips. The dove took flight, escaping through the open doors into the bright Roman sky. The girl dropped to her knees. "My lady," she whispered. Hera stepped forward, unseen by mortal eyes but felt in every breath. "Child," she said gently, "you serve me not through sacrifice, but through mercy." The girl's trembling ceased. She rose, tears shining in her eyes. "Then mercy shall be my offering." And with that, the goddess's presence faded, leaving behind only the echo of feathers in the air. That night, Hera returned to Olympus. She stood beside Zeus, who had long since become Jupiter in the tongues of men. "They have renamed us," she said quietly. "They have always done so," he replied, his tone neither surprised nor sorrowful. "Names are bridges. They do not bind, they connect. But do they remember who we were?" Hera asked. "Or only what they need us to be?" Zeus looked down upon the Roman legions marching under banners of gold. "Perhaps that is all remembrance truly is, need. The living shape the divine to fit their understanding. The gods who endure are those who allow it." Hera turned away from the spectacle of conquest, her gaze falling instead on the hearths of simple homes, mothers whispering prayers, children tracing her symbol in the dust before sleep. There, in those small gestures, she found the truth that empires could never own. "They have forgotten my crown," she murmured. "But not my purpose." In time, poets began to write of her not as storm or wrath, but as wisdom, the quiet power behind the empire's strength. One Roman poet, Ovid, wrote of her as Juno Regina, the eternal feminine will that guided civilization's moral order. His words echoed across centuries, "She is the law that breathes." When Hera read those words, for gods, too, read the thoughts of mortals, she smiled. The poet had not known it, but he had captured her truest form. Not thunder. Not vengeance. Law as compassion. Power as restraint. As centuries passed, her temples began to crumble once more. Rome, too, would fall, just as Greece had. But Hera, Juno, endured in the minds of those who studied her. Scholars debated her symbolism, artists painted her in new styles, philosophers compared her to virtue itself. She was no longer worshipped with fire and blood, but with thought. That, she realized, was the purest form of immortality. One evening, as twilight touched the ruins of her last great temple, Hera stood among the fallen columns. The setting sun cast her shadow across the marble floor, long and golden. In that fading light, the broken crown upon her statue's head glimmered faintly, as if remembering the goddess who once wore it. The peacock landed beside her, its feathers reflecting the twilight like fragments of memory. Hera reached down, brushing her fingers along the stone. "Once they crowned me Queen of Heaven," she said softly. "Now they crown me Queen of Remembrance. And perhaps that is enough." She looked skyward, where the stars shimmered through the veil of dusk. "Every name I've worn was true," she whispered. "Each one a lesson, each one a rebirth." As night fell over the ruins, a lone traveler passed through, pausing to rest beside the shattered statue. He did not know her name, but he felt something, a quiet dignity in the air, a peace that seemed older than stone. He closed his eyes and whispered a prayer without knowing to whom it was offered. Far above, Hera heard it, the nameless prayer carried by the wind. She smiled. For divinity is not the crown upon one's head, but the truth that survives when the crown is gone. The centuries that followed were quieter. The old temples faded, but the constellations endured, silent witnesses to the immortal pair who had ruled both sky and story. Zeus and Hera, once thunder and flame, had become something else entirely, rhythm. Their quarrels had shaped history, their reconciliations had shaped meaning. Yet now, there was no more need for storms. The mortal world no longer feared them. It merely remembered them, as symbols of what could never fully break. From her throne of clouds, Hera gazed across the heavens. Below, the earth shimmered in twilight, the seas calm, the air heavy with evening peace. Beside her sat Zeus, no longer the booming tyrant of myth, but the weary guardian of balance. "It's strange," she said softly, "how silence can feel like victory." Zeus smiled faintly. "Perhaps it's the only one that lasts." They sat in companionable quiet, the kind that comes only after eternity has run out of arguments. For mortals, their union had always been a paradox, love bound by rivalry, devotion laced with defiance. But now, in this age where belief had softened into memory, Hera and Zeus had learned what even the wisest philosophers could not teach: coexistence is not about agreement, it is about endurance. She looked toward the stars, each one a story they had outlived. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "Regret what?" "The thunder. The betrayal. The endless proving of power." Zeus exhaled, the faintest tremor of lightning in his breath. "Once, yes. Now. No. Without the storm, we would never have learned to rest." Hera turned her gaze back to him. For a long moment, there was only stillness, a rare, honest stillness. Then she smiled. "We have become the calm after our own thunder." He chuckled. "You always did have a poet's tongue." "You always had an audience," she replied. Below them, mortals told their stories differently now. The poets no longer described the gods as rulers, but as reflections, divine metaphors for human nature. Lovers quarreled and reconciled, invoking Hera and Zeus as proof that even conflict could yield endurance. A young philosopher in Athens once wrote, "The marriage of heaven and earth is not peace without tension, it is harmony born of it." Hera, hearing his words carried by the wind, smiled. At last, she murmured, "They understand." Zeus leaned back upon his throne. "They remember us more kindly than we deserve." "Perhaps," she said, "but kindness is the form memory takes when anger has done its work." In the distance, thunder rolled, not in fury, but as an echo, a heartbeat of the sky itself. It was no longer a warning. It was rhythm. Hera rose from her seat, her gown trailing starlight as she crossed the marble steps to the edge of Olympus. "Do you hear it?" she asked. "The storm." "The balance," she corrected. "It moves between us. It always has." She extended her hand. Zeus took it without hesitation, not as king to queen, not as conqueror to rival, but as equal to equal. The sky brightened, gold streaking through the clouds. The sound of thunder became music. No longer did they fight for dominion. They had learned a subtler truth: power shared is not diminished, it is perfected. "Do you know," Hera said, "that mortals once feared us more than death?" "I do," Zeus replied. "And now they tell our stories to put children to sleep." Hera smiled. "Perhaps that's what eternity really is, when fear turns into fable." The wind carried the laughter of mortals from far below, children by the fire, storytellers retelling the tales of Olympus. Some called Hera the jealous queen, others the goddess of law. None agreed, but all remembered. Zeus listened to the distant stories. "They argue about who we were," he said. "But they will never know who we became." "Then let them wonder," Hera replied. "Mystery is the only thing the divine should leave behind." The stars shimmered brighter that night. Hera stepped closer to the edge, gazing down at the constellations, Orion chasing forever, Andromeda bound in starlight, Perseus triumphant. Each name a story, each story a fragment of her legacy. "They've immortalized him," Zeus said, nodding to Perseus's constellation. "Yes," she said. "And I placed him there." Zeus glanced at her, surprised. "You did?" "He was a reminder," she said. "That forgiveness creates more lasting monuments than pride." Zeus's expression softened. "Then perhaps we are both monuments now, not of victory, but of endurance." Hera smiled. "Then let endurance be our crown." The clouds beneath their feet drifted, parting to reveal the world asleep in silver moonlight. The oceans breathed, the mountains shimmered, the mortals dreamed. For the first time, the gods did not rule over them, they simply watched. And perhaps that was the truest form of divinity, to watch without needing to command. Hera turned to Zeus. "Tell me," she said, "if the world forgets our names, what remains of us?" He looked out over creation, the faintest spark of lightning flickering in his eyes. "Everything that endures, love, loyalty, the hunger for justice. We are not the thunder or the vows. We are what they mean." She nodded slowly, the truth of it settling over her like dawn. "Then perhaps this is eternity, not to be worshipped, but to be remembered through what they become." For a while, they stood together in silence. The heavens above them glowed with the faint hum of stars, each one a memory, each one a story. And when the first rays of morning touched the marble halls of Olympus, the gods did not stir. They simply existed, two immortal hearts beating in rhythm with a world that no longer needed them, yet could never truly forget them. The thunder rolled once more, soft as breath. It was no longer wrath. It was music. For even the storm, when loved long enough, learns to sing instead of strike. Ages turned, and the world that once trembled under Olympus rose into an age of steel and glass. Empires fell, machines roared, and mortals reached for the stars once thought to be the gods' own domain. Yet, though her temples lay in ruin and her name faded from tongues, Hera endured, not as a goddess, but as an archetype, quietly reshaping herself in the mind of humankind. She had become something more subtle, more profound. Not worshipped, remembered. Not feared, understood. In museums and galleries, her statues stood behind glass, their marble cracked yet glowing under modern light. Tourists gazed upon her likeness, whispering, she was the queen of the gods. Scholars wrote essays about her, some called her a symbol of patriarchy's rebellion, others, the eternal emblem of feminine authority. Hera read it all, for she was still there, drifting in the edges of thought. Every interpretation was true, and none were. In dreams, she walked the new world. She moved through city streets where temples had become skyscrapers, where prayers were replaced by questions. She passed unseen through the minds of women who stood before mirrors, wondering how to balance strength with tenderness. She lingered beside lovers who argued beneath streetlights, hearing echoes of her own quarrels with Zeus, though neither would know they were living her myth anew. The queen of Olympus had become the queen of the subconscious. When humanity began to study itself, Hera found her reflection in psychology and art. Jung wrote of the Hera archetype, the eternal feminine force that demands commitment, seeks loyalty, and holds the world together through law and love. Painters gave her new faces, poets new voices. In every retelling, she evolved. And though her name changed again, into metaphor, symbol, idea, she smiled. Immortality, she realized, was not being remembered as she was, but being reimagined forever. One evening, Hera stood within the halls of a museum in London. A marble bust of her likeness rested on a pedestal, regal, cracked, one eye chipped away by centuries of time. A plaque beneath it read simply, Hera, Roman, Juno. Goddess of marriage and power. A small girl approached the statue, holding her mother's hand. Who was she? The girl asked. The mother smiled. She was a goddess once. She ruled the heavens. The child frowned thoughtfully. Is she still a goddess? The woman hesitated, then said, maybe not. But she still matters. Hera watched them go, her unseen smile faint and wistful. Still matters. The words rippled through her like the echo of an old prayer. Outside, the city's lights burned like constellations, human-made stars replacing the ones she and Zeus had once ruled. Hera stood among them, her reflection mirrored in the glass towers. So this, she whispered, is what eternity looks like. Her peacock appeared beside her, no longer flesh and feather, but a shimmer of light in the rain. Its jeweled eyes glowed faintly, each reflecting an image of the modern world, a courthouse where justice was sworn, a wedding where vows were made, a mother teaching her child truth. These are my temples now, she murmured. Unmarked, unguarded, living. Across oceans, art students sketched her face without knowing her name. Judges quoted her virtues without realizing whose essence they echoed. Lovers fought and forgave, unknowingly replaying her eternal lesson, that love without balance devours itself. Zeus, too, endured, not as a thunder god, but as the symbol of energy, will, and control. Yet Hera's essence remained closer to humanity, woven into the rhythm of their lives. She had become the quiet strength behind their promises, the law that outlived the lawmakers. One night, Hera drifted over the Mediterranean, the sea that had once reflected her temples and festivals. Below her, fishermen cast nets, unaware that the goddess whose stories were told in those same waters still lingered in the tide. She whispered into the wind, and the sea answered with the same steady pulse it had since creation. "Do you miss them?" came a voice. It was Zeus, his presence soft as a memory. "I miss their faith," Hera replied. "But I love what replaced it, their curiosity." "They no longer pray to us," he said. "No," she answered, smiling faintly. "They pray to themselves now, and in doing so, they reach us still." Zeus regarded her with quiet admiration. "You always understood them better than I did." "Because I was made to keep them together," she said. "Even now, they live by what we taught, love bound by promise, justice bound by compassion. They don't call it divine anymore, but the shape is the same." He nodded. "Then perhaps our work was never to rule them, but to teach them how to rule themselves." Hera looked out at the horizon, where dawn began to bloom. The sky blushed pink, the same hue that once crowned her temples. "It's strange," she said softly, "how the world remembers us in silence more faithfully than it ever did in song." Zeus's form began to fade into the clouds, but his voice lingered. "And yet, even in silence, your name endures." When he was gone, Hera stood alone in the new world, timeless, unseen, but present in every act of love that sought truth, every promise that held steady through chaos. In the reflection of the sea, she saw her image, not the flawless queen of old, but a woman reborn through every age, ancient, modern, eternal. And as the wind carried her voice across the waves, she whispered one final truth, not to gods or kings, but to the hearts of all who would listen. "I was never only divine. I was what endures when divinity fades, the part of you that keeps its vows, even when no one else remembers why." The sea shimmered, the wind stilled. Somewhere, far below, a wedding bell rang in the distance. For some gods are not lost, they simply become the truths humanity learns to live by. The sun was setting over the Aegean when Hera returned to where her story had begun. The island of Samos, once alive with hymns and torchlight, now lay silent. The great Heraean, her first and most sacred temple, was little more than broken columns jutting from the earth like the bones of a sleeping giant. Grass swayed where priests once walked. The air smelled of salt and memory. She descended in silence, her feet barely brushing the ground. The ruins greeted her not with worship, but with wind. And that, she realized, was enough. In the fading light, Hera walked among the remnants of her own eternity. The marble was cracked, yet the carving still whispered her name. To Hera, one inscription read, "Guardian of Vows." The letters were nearly erased by time, but she traced them gently with her fingers, as if comforting an old friend. How strange it felt to stand among her own ghosts. Every broken pillar, every shattered statue told a fragment of her history, not the triumphs, but the transformations. Here, once, mortals had begged for vengeance. Here, she had been feared, obeyed, adored. Now, the air was quiet, filled only with the sigh of the sea. Yet in that quiet, she felt something she had not known in millennia, peace. As the sun dipped lower, Hera sat upon the fallen steps of her temple. The sea glimmered gold before her, the horizon melting into dusk. For a moment, the goddess who had ruled Olympus felt small, not diminished, but freed. No crowns, no thunder, no vows to uphold. Only existence. She closed her eyes. The wind brushed her hair like a prayer. From behind, a sound, footsteps crunching lightly over gravel. She turned, expecting perhaps a wandering traveler, but saw instead a solitary figure, an archaeologist, a young woman with sand-streaked clothes and a notebook pressed to her chest. She froze when she saw Hera, though she did not recognize her for who she was. "I didn't think anyone else was here," the woman said softly. "I've been here a long time," Hera replied with a faint smile. The woman knelt beside the nearest pillar, brushing away dust. "I'm studying these ruins," she explained. "They say this place once belonged to a queen, a goddess, actually. Hera. The last temple to her name." Hera's smile deepened. "And what have you learned about her?" The mortal hesitated, looking up toward the twilight sky. "That she was proud. Jealous, maybe. But also, lonely. I think she wanted love to mean something sacred, not just beautiful." The words settled in the air like the echo of truth. Hera nodded slowly. "You've learned more than most." The woman laughed quietly. "I don't think she was cruel. Just misunderstood." "She was both," Hera said. "And that made her real." The archaeologist tilted her head, curious. "You speak as if you knew her." "I did," Hera answered softly. "In another time." The woman smiled, unaware of how close to revelation she stood. "If gods existed," she said, "I think she'd still be here, not in the sky, but in us. In the way we love. The way we promise." For a long moment, Hera said nothing. Then she looked toward the sea, where the waves shimmered with fading light. "Perhaps she is," she whispered. The mortal, satisfied with her notes, stood and dusted off her hands. "I'll come back tomorrow," she said. "There's still more to uncover." When she walked away, Hera watched her until she vanished over the hill. The goddess sat in silence again, the scent of the sea wrapping around her like memory. The mortal's words lingered, "Still be here." Hera looked up at the stars emerging one by one, constellations she had once commanded, now glowing freely without her direction. "So this is what remains," she murmured. "Not temples or thrones. Just meaning." She rose slowly, walking to the edge of the sea. The water shimmered, reflecting her face, no longer the flawless visage carved in marble, but a woman's face, timeless yet human. For the first time, she did not look away. Behind her, the wind stirred the ancient stones, and for a heartbeat, the temple seemed alive again. The pillars straightened, the roof glowed, and the sound of distant hymns filled the air. She could almost see them, the priests, the brides, the torches. The living memory of devotion. But it was not the past returning. It was the world remembering. The illusion faded, leaving only ruin and sky. Hera smiled, her reflection trembling in the water. "I am not gone," she said quietly. "I have only changed shape." From the clouds above, Zeus's voice drifted faintly, soft, almost tender. "And what shape is that, my queen?" She looked toward the horizon. "Theirs," she said. "The hearts that still keep their vows. The hands that build again, even after breaking." A pause. Then, warmth in his tone, "Then they will never lose you." The sea breeze carried her hair across her face, and for a moment, Hera felt every lifetime she had ever lived, goddess, queen, mother, idea. She had raged, forgiven, endured. And now, at last, she understood, the divine was not meant to rule forever, but to teach eternity how to live within time. The waves whispered around her feet. The peacock appeared one final time, its feathers luminous even in twilight. It circled once, then vanished into the fading light. Hera watched it go, her smile calm, her eyes reflecting the fire of the setting sun. As darkness fell, she turned from the sea and began to walk toward the hills, away from the ruins, toward whatever waited beyond myth. Her steps were slow, but sure. Behind her, the last temple of Hera glowed faintly, not from torch or moonlight, but from memory itself. For as long as humanity remembered love, loyalty, and the courage to forgive, the goddess would never truly fade. When dawn came, the archaeologists who returned found the air still warm, the sea unusually still. Some swore they heard faint laughter carried by the wind. Others said the ruins shimmered for a heartbeat, as though the stones themselves were remembering their queen. They were both right. For immortality was never the absence of ending, it was being remembered in what endures. The wind over Samos was quiet now, the ruins of the Heraean glinting faintly beneath the morning sun. No hymns rose, no offering smoked, yet the air felt holy, the kind of silence that exists when something has completed its purpose. Hera stood among the fallen stones for the last time. She no longer appeared as the radiant queen of Olympus, her form shimmered between light and air, human and divine. The centuries had stripped away everything but truth, and the truth was this: gods do not die. They become what we remember of them. She looked to the horizon where the sea met the sky, a boundary that had once defined her kingdom. So this is what remains, she whispered. Not fear. Not devotion. Understanding. Behind her, footsteps echoed softly, not mortal this time, but immortal. Zeus appeared, his figure bathed in dawnlight. His face was calm, the fire of youth long gone, replaced by something deeper, awareness. They still speak your name, he said. Not in temples, but in hearts. Hera smiled faintly. And yours? He shrugged, a flash of humor in his eyes. In storms, mostly. For a moment, they stood side by side, the eternal husband and wife, rivals and reflections, no longer gods of dominance, but of balance. They have learned, Hera said. Mortals no longer beg us to fix the world. They mend it themselves. And we? Zeus asked. What are we, when they no longer need us? She turned to him. We are the memory that keeps them humble. Zeus nodded, gazing at the waves below. Then perhaps our reign was never about rule. It was about teaching them to bear their own thunder. Hera looked upward. The sky shimmered with morning light, and she saw the faint shapes of all that had passed, Ares in battle, Hephaestus in his forge, Perseus among the stars. Each one an echo of her own lessons, strength, forgiveness, endurance. For centuries, she had been feared for her wrath, misunderstood for her jealousy. But now, in the stillness of this new world, her legend had softened into something wiser, a meditation on loyalty, pride, and love's long endurance. She began to walk slowly along the temple's edge, her hand brushing the cracked stone. They will call me myth, she said quietly. But in truth, I was their mirror. Every vow they made, every law they wrote, every heart they broke, they learned from us. Zeus followed her gaze. And what did we learn from them? She smiled. To let go. As the sun climbed higher, the wind picked up, sweeping through the ruins like a song. The old prayers returned for a moment, faint but distinct, rising not from mortal lips but from memory itself. It was not worship. It was gratitude. Hera closed her eyes and listened. Do you hear that? She asked. Yes, said Zeus. The sound of us fading. No, she corrected softly. The sound of us becoming. Her form began to glow, her edges dissolving into the air. She was not dying, she was diffusing, returning to everything that had once contained her, the justice of rulers, the devotion of lovers, the endurance of mothers. Zeus reached for her hand, but she was already half-light. Where will you go? He asked. Everywhere, she said. Wherever there is promise. Wherever there is balance. He smiled sadly. And me? You will be the voice that reminds them to look upward, she replied. I will be the whisper that keeps them grounded. The wind carried her words, scattering them like petals. The ruins shimmered, the stones briefly glowing gold before returning to gray. Hera's form dissolved completely, her essence merging with the breeze. And for a heartbeat, the world stilled. Then, from the sea, came a sound, gentle and rhythmic, like distant footsteps upon water. A new age was beginning. Humanity would no longer speak to gods, but gods would live quietly in what humanity had learned. Centuries later, when philosophers wrote of reason, poets of devotion, and lovers of loyalty, they would not know they were writing of her. But Hera's law would linger still, the law of reverence. That every bond, divine or mortal, is sacred not because it is perfect, but because it is chosen. That faith, when shared, is stronger than power. That the truest form of immortality is not eternal life, but the grace to endure change. High above, a single peacock feather drifted down from the clouds, landing between the ancient stones. It shimmered once, then vanished, leaving only light. The goddess had gone. But her story, her lesson, would never end. For every vow kept, every heart forgiven, every truth spoken with courage, there, she remains. And as the echoes of her story fade into the quiet night, may your thoughts drift gently to the temples of old, where even the gods dreamed of peace. Until the next story calls from beyond Olympus, rest, and let the myths keep watch.